As well, yeah. All right, I think we're ready to get going. Start our meeting, which is Town Council meeting number 21-22, Tuesday, November 29th. We're here in Town Council Chambers at 6 p.m. And with us tonight on the council, we have Councilor Fournier.
Here.
Councilor Lawrence.
Here.
Councilor Daniele.
Here.
Councilor Bradley.
Here.
Councilor Egan.
Here.
And Chair Pilch is here, and Councilor Pillsbury is excused due to illness, though he may join us for part of the meeting. But there's something going around in his house again. So with that, let's stand and do the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay. In your packets, you should have minutes from two meetings from October 18th and November 15th. So are there any questions or comments or adjustments to those minutes? Councilor Bradley?
Yeah, I think it's on the minutes of the 18th. Excuse me. On the minutes of the 18th, there is a discussion about the sewer. Is that the right set? Just sorry, I should have marked it. In any event, let me just make sure. This is called being prepared.
It's on the 18th, you said?
I thought it was on the 18th, the earlier one.
It's under information exchange on the 18th. It's on the very front.
Yep, first page, bottom of the first page.
Information exchange was about sewer.
Okay. Yes, thank you. At the bottom of the section on the fourth order of business, information exchange, there's a statement that says, Councilor Fournier and Councilor Lawrence agreed to be the two councilors that work with the sewer district. And I think that's wrong. What happened in that discussion was the two councilors discussed it and decided that Councilor Fournier would be the person that works with me in the sewer district.
Right. Fournier and Bradley.
Yeah.
Okay.
Any other questions? Anyone care to make a motion to waive the reading and approve those as amended?
So moved.
So moved.
Second.
It's moved by Bradley, seconded by Lawrence. Thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Oh, and Councilor Egan is abstaining, so that's 5-0 to 1, with Pillsbury absent and Egan abstaining. I did my math right. Okay. Third order of business, announcements. I have two. The first is about our climate action plan. The town is partnering with the Greater Portland Council of Governments, GPCOG, to develop Freeport's climate action plan, which is a plan to address impacts from climate change and build a more sustainable Freeport. Municipalities use climate action plans as roadmaps to make informed decisions and prioritize actions. We're in the early phase of this project, but there will be opportunities for the public to be involved in this planning process. The public can sign up to receive project updates and meeting notices through the Climate Action Plan tab on the Freeport Sustainability Advisory Board's page on the town's website. So town website, Freeport Sustainability page, Climate Action tab if you're interested. And secondly, the nominations are now being accepted for the 2022 Citizen of the Year. Every year, the Town Council presents a Citizen of the Year award to honor those who have significantly contributed to the quality of the town. Nomination forms are available at the town office here and on the town's website at freeportmaine.com. Deadline for nominations is January 5th of 2023, which is coming up. Anybody else have any announcements? Councilor Daniele, let's see whose hand that belonged to.
The Freeport Sustainability Advisory Board is going to host a lecture on December 5th. It's going to be at the library starting, I think, at 6:30. The topic is EPR and recycling, so extended producer responsibility.
Counselor Lawrence?
Yeah, the Freeport Players are back, and we're doing a live show this weekend. So if you want to come by, they're at the FPAC. It's radio, so come by. It's a lot of fun. Very interesting show. It's 7:30. The doors open at 7 on Friday and Saturday, and at 2 on Sunday.
Anybody from the council in the show?
I am not in the show this year. I will be in the next one.
All right. Promises.
I go almost every year. It's great.
Any other announcements before we go to information exchange? All right, moving on to a closely related item of information exchange. This is a time for councilors to share information from committees, boards, or other goings-on. Councilor Bradley, your hand shot up for that.
Yeah, I would just like to report that as a result of the discussion at the last meeting about transportation, a small group of people have gotten together and have been working on the idea of transportation along Main Street and then from Main Street out around town. And that will, I've asked the chair to put that item for some decisions that are not catastrophic but important on our next council agenda.
And so far, I suggested putting that under other business because I'm not anticipating that we need a formal action on any significant budget items other than more of a consensus if you want it to be a regular agenda item.
The two things that I think you're going to have to decide whether you want to take this extended golf cart vehicle and use it on Main Street. If you do, then two things have to happen in order to get it usable. One is it's got to be registered with the Department of Motor Vehicle, and the second is it's got to be insured. And both of those require, I would think, you to direct or at least, maybe not, maybe the manager could do that all on his own.
Do you need just consensus, or do you need an action?
We would definitely need consensus.
Yeah.
If there's dollars involved, we haven't discussed the actual amount, Ed. So if there's big dollars involved, then the council would have to be involved. If it's very small or no dollars, then we can.
Very small we're talking about doing it initially as a pop-up during weekends and times that are busy around just to see how it works.
Yep.
And the initial cost of the vehicle for that experiment between now and the spring is $250, and that's the deal with the Desert of Maine.
I'm pretty sure I can find $250 in even my operating budget if we need to for that.
So we can do that as consensus.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. So a discussion item would be good because there are things the town will have to take on that additional function. So I want to make sure the council's on board with it. We won't need dollars, and if it's short term and it's not an agreement that's not extending beyond this year, that's something I can execute without the council having to approve it. So.
Okay.
We would do the experiment, see how we liked it, how it worked, and then make a decision about whether we want to lease it, and then a little more money comes involved for the summer season if we want to do it.
That's a spring decision.
That's spring decision.
And that would probably be an appropriate budget discussion for conclusion. So we'll work on multiple levels for the council to get involved at that point as well. So.
Any other information to exchange? Councilor Egan.
Two items. One, I got a second follow-up on a resident concern about the intersection of Pleasant Hill Road and Flying Point Road. If you are exiting Pleasant Hill Road to come towards town on Flying Point Road, there is no stop sign. It is a yield, and yield sometimes might say, just keep on cruising. Both resident complaints to me were from bicyclists. One of them had a car pass them while they were on the bicycle on Flying Point Road on the right-hand side. So the bicyclist was coming into town on Flying Point Road, and the car exiting Pleasant Hill Road passed the bicyclist on the right, which if you're on a bike and somebody's zooming up on your right side between you and the side of the road, that could be pretty unnerving. So I had asked previously last month if this was going to be on a complete streets agenda, and I'm just following up with the manager to make sure that we push it to the top so that we get some kind of focus on that. Obviously, a stop sign would do a dramatic improvement on that intersection. I'm not sure, I don't live down there, so that may be some contention about whether or not that becomes a stop sign, but certainly the bicyclists are terrified of that intersection. The second thing is I was approached by a resident who quite unfortunately, tragically, lost their son in a motorcycle accident on the bridge going over at exit 20 several years ago. Matthew McMillan died as a result of a motorcycle accident. The mother, Melody Seymour, has asked if we would support the idea of her petitioning to the state DOT to have a memorial name put on the bridge in her son's honor. Senator Matty Daughtry is going to support that at the state to go through whatever the DOT process is to get a name on a bridge. You've seen them on plaques around the state. DOT has advised our resident, the petitioner for this, that a letter of support from the council is the first piece to come forward, because the DOT doesn't want to take an action in a local community if there isn't support for it. So I'm bringing this up to see if anybody would have an objection for a very simple one-paragraph letter to support Melody Seymour's effort to name, to have a commemorative plaque, memorial plaque in the honor of her son who was killed on that bridge a number of years ago, the state DOT. Sure.
So, and do you remember the circumstances of the accident?
No, I don't.
He was tragically killed on the bridge by some event. He fell off the bridge and died.
The motorcycle hit a vehicle. I wasn't there, so I don't know those details. But the letter is not any sort of verification about what may or may not have happened. It's the state's process to put a memorial plaque on any particular bridge, but it does start with at least a letter of support from the community. So that's what I'm asking for this evening. If anybody has any challenges to that or questions to that, let me know.
What happened, Ed, was a vehicle was exiting with a boat trailer, and the motorcycle come out heading west on Desert Road and hit the back of the boat trailer as the car was turning. So that it was a tragic accident that at the time when the vehicle come through, it was clear, and the motorcycle come over the top.
Any objection to having the council write a letter in support of the memorial plaque? No.
Okay, great,
Okay.
thank you.
All right, any other information exchange items? I've got just one quick note for the rest of you guys. It's time to do committee assignments again. So if you have any requests to change what your existing assignment is, or want to try something new, just let me know in the next week or so. If everything stays the same or there's no controversy, we can take care of that at next Tuesday's meeting. But if there's debates or changes or things like that, we can postpone one more meeting. But either way, we can get that done by the end of the year. And then secondly, we have something of note to celebrate tonight. We've got some significant achievement by one of our town's youth and a neighbor and friend of mine. So I'll let our state representative, who's joined us here tonight, introduce why we're passing out the award and what it's all about.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair and esteemed members of the Freeport Town Council. My name is Melanie Sachs. I'm very proud to represent the wonderful community of Freeport in the state legislature. As you know, from time to time, one of the best parts of my job is connecting with youth, and for various reasons, but sometimes it's to give awards. And if things work out well, sometimes I get to do it here. So it is my great pleasure tonight to be honoring Eli Spalding, and we will tell you why. And first I will introduce his coach, Jason Ouellette.
Good evening, and thank you for allowing me to be here to speak tonight. Eli Spalding definitely had a season to remember this year. For the second year in a row, he went undefeated in our regular season high school matches. He averaged during our matches a score of 1 under par for every match for the second year in a row. In his time playing at what is now the main golf center here in Freeport, I could count maybe on one hand the last 2 years when he didn't shoot under par during practice or during a match for 9 holes. As you know, he went on to win the Class B state championship this year, and he did so in dramatic fashion with a birdie putt on the last hole. And it was the second most clutch moment I've ever witnessed personally. And I say second because I think where he really won the match was on the hole before. He had a difficult 15-foot putt to stay tied for par. And I asked Alexa tonight before I came down here, so you know it must be true, that on the PGA Tour, there were only 3 golfers who could make that type of putt 1 out of 3 times, like a 33% chance. So it was a difficult putt, and he drained it to stay tied, and then that opened the door for him to win the state championship on the next hole. After states, he went on to win the New England High School Golf Championship with a score of 5 under par, I believe, which is pretty impressive. And now when I talk to people about Eli, I used to say that he was the best high school golfer in the state of Maine, and now I can say that he's the best high school golfer in New England. For all of the accomplishments this season, he was named All-Conference to the Western Maine Conference, and for the second year in a row, he won the Chevry Award, which is given to the best high school golfer in the Western Maine Conference. So clearly he's a leader for our team with the way he plays on the golf course, but as good as he is as a player, he is also as good as a teammate. Every day he's helping the players on our team with their game, any part of the game that they need help with, he's always there to support them and encourage them and to teach them. And if his career on the PGA Tour doesn't work out, then I could very easily see him as an excellent golf teacher in the future. So I've been blessed to watch him all 3 years of high school so far, and I started thinking about how next year is the final year that I'll be able to work with him, but I really am excited to see what he's going to do as a golfer in the future. So I'll turn it back over to Melanie for the presentation.
Thank you. Did y'all catch he's just a junior? Eli, you want to come up here with me? And so for all of these extraordinary accomplishments, I am so proud to be able to honor Eli this evening in front of all of you with a legislative sentiment, and it says, "Be it known to all that we, the members of the state, the Senate, and the House of Representatives, join in recognizing Eli Spalding of Freeport, who won the 2022 New England Interscholastic High School Golf Championship," and lots of other things. "We extend our congratulations and best wishes, and be it ordered that this official expression of sentiment be sent forthwith on behalf of the 130th Legislature and the people of the state of Maine. Please join me in congratulating Eli."
Yeah, I would like to say something.
There we go.
It's going to be pretty short, but I'd just like to thank you guys for all your time tonight, and thank Melanie for this awesome award, and Coach for being with me for these first 3 years, and obviously still got 1 more year. So super excited for next year, and we'll see what we can do. But thank you to everyone who's supported me, and thank you guys. It really means a lot. So. Thank you.
Town manager will be back in a moment.
I'll stay right here.
Congratulations, Eli. Thanks for representing Freeport so well. I've been following your career since the day you were born. I was in, I think, the next room over, not in a creepy way, but dealing with our own birth. But congratulations again. I know, right? Stalking you since you were born.
He was golfing at that age?
I knew he would be.
You called it first?
Yeah.
Out of everybody?
With that, town manager, why don't you give a report?
Oh,
It's that time.
considering I can't follow that level of greatness in my entire life. All right, so I've got a couple items of interest here to report on. I want to provide, we still have 2 days or a day and a half here left for the assessing program, the tax stabilization fund for I would say seniors, but it's 65 plus. I don't know if those are synonymous these days. We have had 567 applications for separate properties in Freeport. Some of those are still under review, but 560 have been approved. 4 of them are awaiting more information, so likely to be approved, but need more documentation. Only 3 of the 567 applications did not meet the baseline qualification guidelines. So what does that mean to us? I'm thinking that maybe our state rep might want to, our wonderful state representative might want to hear this. We're talking about the tax stabilization fund. No, it's okay. I wasn't expecting you to jump down or anything, but we had $284 million of valuation in Freeport has qualified into that pool out of our, so about 0.3 billion out of $2.1 billion in property valuation in Freeport. So that's what, 15% roughly of all the property in town. So I'm telling you this because I know your feelings, and we'll talk about those in a second because I share them now too. $3.6 million in taxes essentially have been stabilized out of the roughly 30 plus million that we collect for school, county, and town. So that matches up with the 15% of the valuations, about 15% of our total collectibles. I mentioned those 2 numbers, and I said Melanie might be interested in hearing those because she's one of the first ones that expressed concerns about the total cost to this program at the state level and whether or not it's going to be sustainable. So you heard it here first. That's going to be a really tough number for Freeport, which makes up just a few percentage points of the total statewide, less than 2 percentage points of the total aggregate statewide valuation. Multiply that times 75, and that's what the total. So any increase to that $3 million in taxes, any amount that increases is going to have to be, supposedly now, is going to be made up by the state. But both your state rep and I have concerns about that amount actually ever being appropriated in future years, sufficient to cover that shortfall. So just a little warning bell. I think it's great that there are 560 people who've qualified in that application, but I do have huge level of concern that there may not be money there in future years, as I think every single municipality in the state has now said over the past few months, that there'll be sufficient money there to cover that, which just means that just like revenue sharing, that when it was reduced, a reduction in that amount will just be an additional tax amount for the budget. So just throwing that out there so that it's not a surprise if it happens, say, 2 years from now. Next year will be fine, and the year after will be fine, but it will be about 2 years from now that that shortfall would start to hit. Counselor?
I guess my question is, we all worry that there won't be state funds to support the increase. If that were to occur, would the tax then be unfrozen, or is the statute silent on that?
Yes, the second. Yes, it's absolutely silent. Yeah, you can hop up. I'd love it. But that wasn't contemplated in the bill that's been passed. There may be developments from the legislature on that in the future, so go ahead.
Right, I just wanted to confirm it is silent on that, and if it continues on at this rate, because of course the delta will change as those are frozen and valuation continues to go up, that delta is going to be even greater. Delta meaning the difference between what is would have been revenue given to the communities and that which is supposedly made up by the state. And so there won't be any money left for literally anything else in the state budget, but it is silent.
Okay, and that obviously, as I understand it, puts a burden on those properties who are not frozen if it doesn't.
Correct.
But there's a trap here somewhere for the older people as well, and that is, let's say, and I'm one of those people, and I applied for this just to be totally transparent. If after 2 years the stabilization were to be eliminated and properties were to go to their actual market value as assessed. And that was done all at once. It could catch a lot of older people in a trap of having not put aside the income to pay for that tax increase during the period of time that the tax was stabilized. So I hope that as this discussion goes on, that issue be, and I'm sure it will, but I'd be remiss not to say that would be a concern for me and for all the other elders who have had their tax stabilized.
100%. Completely on board with that.
Can't hear you, Melanie. Sorry.
It was not a bill that was vetted well nor detailed in the way that it should have. Property tax relief for seniors is something that we worked on, and it passed quite a few good bills. This was not one of them to me. It was not done in a way to avoid some very avoidable pieces, unfortunately. And I've been really open about that. I'm not saying anything I haven't communicated before.
And I don't want to give the impression this is a grill our state rep session.
No, that's quite all right.
To say that Melanie and I have been on, I think, the same page from the day this passed. We sat down and went over it, and you actually had more concerns than I did at the time. And I was like, oh, that will never be an issue. And then about 2 weeks later, I'm like, oh, she was right on everything. It's an issue.
Yeah.
So.
And as Peter said, most municipalities have the same concern. I haven't heard anyone who doesn't have this concern. Not only about what I call the cliff coming up, Councilor Bradley. That would be a cliff for many, many seniors if that were the case.
Yeah, nothing's free, and some things are just too good to be true. And so I guess my question is, you've talked about it, you agree on it, what are you doing? And I don't mean that in a negative way. I mean, what effort is underway to address the problems that this bill created and could create in the future for all different kinds of people?
Right. I've personally talked to the Maine Attorney General's office, to my House Democratic leadership, to my Taxation Committee chair, and every single person said we're going to come together in a bipartisan way and try and figure out a solution in this coming session, and the administration as well.
And the Municipal Association is also drafting legislation that's going to make it to you. Whether or not it will be considered or whether there'll be an in-house fix by the legislature this session is really up to all of you together.
Whichever vehicle, but I think everybody recognizes there were significant flaws to this particular program's design. Again, I just want to urge people, homestead exemption, other property tax, fairness relief, sales tax credit. There are many, many, many sales tax and property tax programs that I urge you to also look at so that you are having all of the benefits that you could potentially receive.
The good news is a lot of people did fill out homestead exemptions because that's one of the qualifications for this program. When they came in to apply, you don't have to be enrolled in the homestead program, but the property has to be eligible for homestead participation. So a handful of people didn't have the homestead on their property, and we handed them the form at the same time and said, hey, you might want this too. Please fill it out. That's another one that there's a good reimbursement from the state to municipalities.
Well, and it got better because of a bill. That's an example of good tax policy, where having sat where you sat, or you are sitting now, knowing that it was only reimbursing municipalities 70%, put in with one of my good senator from Augusta, Senator Pouliot, had a bill in to increase the reimbursement to municipalities for homestead exemption, and we figured out a compromise so we can get that to 100% ratcheted up slowly so that we can absorb it in the budget. But so that Freeport will be getting far greater reimbursement every year for the homestead exemption until it reaches 100% in just a few years. So that is a good policy.
As you know, this is one of my pet peeves, representing a lot of elderly people in town. What really troubles me, and I think the handwriting's on the wall, is going to be some adjustment at the state.
Right.
And that, as you said, is going to catch some of our residents by surprise, and it's going to hurt, as a lot of them are hurting today with fuel costs, food costs, and everything else that they're challenging. Well, I'm hoping then we have the vision here at this council. Now we have that data, Peter, that maybe we can look at continuing this and addressing this at a local level, which many municipalities have done around us. We initially started down that road and the state passed the bill, but you know, I think it's going to be a very difficult issue that I know as a council member and looking some of the people out there that now have the relief and say, oh, guess what? Boy, I think this needs to take a couple of approaches where we go. And I know we got some time, but now's the time to maybe start looking at this so we don't get blindsided.
Right, and I appreciate the transparency that I've had, both with all of you and with the town manager around this particular bill. And the more that you can talk about it with your constituents would be amazing, right? Knowing that this is probably going to change in some way, however that is, because it's just unsustainable as currently designed. And frankly, gives a big tax breaks to those who have quite substantial incomes as well. There's no means testing with this particular bill. Yeah. It's not income-based at all. So,
There's a number of issues in the bill. I don't disagree, but my whole issue is, once we give it to someone, but that's something we can discuss.
Well, I think what Councilor Bradley brought up was identified by staff, by our tax assessing staff, probably day 2 of looking at this, like, whoa, what's gonna happen when it's not funded? And knowing that that is gonna be a little bit of a poison pill for the council locally, that you're not gonna have a choice if the state drops the funding, because you're not going to be, if it's, say, 5 or 10 years from now, what Councilor Bradley described, that's not an option that we can really put on people's plates. Oh, yeah, your tax bill's going up $1,000 because it was reduced by $200 over 5 years or $100 over 10 years. And now all of a sudden you've been planning for $3,000 tax bill and you're on a fixed income and it's $4,000 next year. That's worse than the $200 increase.
absolutely.
For 5 years. You're hitting somebody with a massive increase. So we're concerned about it. There are options locally. There are options at the state. I'd love to see, we'll watch what happens in the legislature. I know you're on board and that you know what the issues are, and I'll keep in touch when we see the municipal associations bill, and then whatever the competing proposals that your colleagues put in, or maybe you put in to look at it. So we'll stay in touch. I know we talk on these things.
We do.
And again, this wasn't meant to be a, let's sling questions at Melanie, but I did want to make sure that the second I found out all this, that it goes to the council, so you hear about it here first. And in other news that is state-related, but doesn't probably, Melanie will want to hear, but she was at the meeting, but doesn't need to be grilled on. We did have a meeting, an airboat stakeholder group meeting today as well. There's some decent progress going on there. We are going to continue to meet over the winter. The State Department of Marine Resources have been leading that effort. Their Marine Patrol staff and the Commissioner's Office staff. The discussion really is centered around, it's really narrowed down to early morning hours is what the DMR staff has identified as where the majority of complaints in Freeport and a few other areas are being generated. The majority of complaints, by the way, are from the Harrisseeket River that they're seeing statewide because of both the geography and some of the activity that's going on in there. Just to put things in perspective, we learned today that we're 60-plus airboats registered in the state of Maine, and Freeport has 4 or 5 of those. So there are 30-ish over in Brunswick, and the rest are scattered around Georgetown, Phippsburg, Harpswell, Waldoboro. They've got some up there, they had said. So the discussion and the focus from the department has been on those early morning hours, and that really seems what they're willing to tackle, which I think would be maybe not solve all the problems, but would be a pretty welcome attempt by the residents at addressing concerns. DMR also, one thing I was encouraged by, they appear willing to propose some administrative rulemaking and or possibly legislation, although they've not decided what that'll look like. They were talking to us like they're willing to at least go down the administrative rulemaking route of proposing a rule from staff level through the administrative rulemaking process at the state level to address these issues. So there's a conversation that hasn't been resolved about whether it would be location specific to areas where there are high complaints, like for example, the Harrisseeket River, Freeport, and Casco Bay, whether it would be narrowly focused or whether that would be a statewide limit. So, you know, something like hours or decibels or something like that at a specific time. That hasn't been really resolved for certain. However, the good news is that they are willing, I think at the staff level, they are willing to propose some rules for consideration. So, and they won't be popular. There's already contention on this working group among residents and harvesters and all kinds of different tensions that we've been witness to. But the fact that they're willing to take some steps, I'm very encouraged by. So that'll probably happen in the spring before the next summer kind of harvesting season kicks off. Counselor?
Yeah, I take it the town staff is going to sit in on these meetings and participate.
Yes, we are. So there are 3 towns that are represented right now. It's Brunswick, Harpswell, and Freeport. And town staff in each of those towns there are 9 seats. So there's a residents from each town, harvesters from each town, and municipal reps from each town. So we have 1/9 of the input on that board between myself and Charlie Tatro.
Okay. I'd just like to state that although the majority of the complaints have come out of the Harrisicot River Basin, and understandably, the problem also exists in McCoy Bay, and it's maybe more a Brunswick problem in the sense that it's for those flats that they show up, but they do show up all along the Freeport shore. And if you're going to work a solution for Harrisicot, then don't forget McCoy.
I don't think, there hasn't been any discussion, sorry, I may have given some bad intel there. The discussion has not been limited to the Harrisicot River. The complaints have been highly focused in the Harrisicot River, but the discussion, I think, has been Freeport would be Freeport territorial waters would be the smallest area that they would consider. That's not set in stone, but that's what the staff kind of feedback was, so.
Keep McCoy in mind as you go through the process.
They may exclude Brunswick, which may not
It's up
help
to them.
you, so, if you've, well, we should talk offline if you've
Well,
got
there's-
concerns, or if your neighbors have concerns about that, I should be in
The
touch
whole,
with them.
the whole shore has, just like the whole river has different opinions, the whole shore has different opinions. But the noise is clearly an issue. And for some people, it's really objectionable, particularly in the morning hours, because that's when you have your windows open in the summer. It's the only time you sleep with the air in your bedroom. And so that's it. But there isn't the sort of militancy about clamors versus residents as there seems to be in the Harrisicot River Basin. And that may be because there's just not as many residents and there's not as many clamors.
And the number of people who are affected is small
Yeah.
on the harvesting side who would be disproportionately affected. It's about 3 or 4 people that are using them to harvest in Freeport. So it's interesting. The staff at DMR is walking a very fine line between not stepping too hard on commercial harvesters and not infringing their money-making abilities and their ability to continue to support themselves at their job, and also not having people woken up every 4 a.m., every 2 weeks a month in the summertime. So it's a no-win position for them, and for us. You've seen all the complaints. It's people angry on both sides, but I am encouraged that for the longest time it had kind of been an avoidance. We've gotten a sense of avoidance that, we'll see, it'll resolve itself, but they're actually doing good data gathering. The staff has realized that the problem, they've been out on the water at 4, 5, 6 a.m. when the boats have been operating wide open throttle and, at 90, 100 decibels when it's dead silent out. And the staff who are leading this process are able to now sit there and say, that's unreasonable at that period of time. We understand you don't want to lose your ability to work. However, we think it's unreasonable at that period of time based on what our own ears have done at 4 a.m. on a June morning. You would have woken up everyone in my neighborhood if that was in my neighborhood. So it's really good to see that, at least not just hypothetical mudslinging, but people who've been on the ground, who've measured the noise, are really starting to have that conversation. So not saying it's going to go well, but I am saying that they are willing to have the conversation, which is a really good first step. So.
Any other questions for the manager? Anything else you got in your report?
I got a lot more stuff, but I've been here for 35 minutes now between the two, so I'll hand it over back to you, Mr. Chair, so we can get moving.
All right, so now we've got our public comment period, which is open for anyone to come and address the council on items not on our agenda. So we've got at least one here in the room. Is there anybody on Zoom or?
Not have any hands on Zoom, but there are some people. So anybody on Zoom that wishes to participate, use the raise hand feature, and after we get to the people in the room, we will have you online.
Mr. Spalding.
Hello, Council. Nice to see you. Andy Spalding. I live at 59 South Street, and thanks for the recognition for the boy earlier. That was nice. I just wanted to say a couple things. I've volunteered for the Active Living Committee when we had the Active Living Committee. Jake and I were on that committee. And I still stay involved with the Complete Streets Committee. I'm not on it, but I work on a group called Connect Freeport, and we essentially support Complete Streets. That was Jake's name, actually, Connect Freeport. So way back when the Active Living Task Force created the Active Living Plan, one of the major recommendations in the plan was to hire an active living coordinator. I don't think anyone has felt that has really been all that feasible since 2014 or 15. I wanted to encourage you as counselors now, more of a long-term encouragement to consider a role. I don't think active living coordinator is the right role now, but when we think about all the various boards and committees we have, especially with the downtown visioning work that's happening, with a lot of the complete streets work that's happening, I find myself in a lot of meetings where we are looking, exploring funding opportunities, for example, to either build an extension of a multi-use path down Mallet Drive. That's a fairly prominent example, or some other bike, pedestrian, multimodal accommodation. We find ourselves looking at grants. We find ourselves meeting with citizens about potential easements, as I have done with the Soul family at Gritty's, for example, to potentially explore an easement to come up what used to be the old trolley line. Our staff often seem very overloaded with work, either staffing many of our boards and committees. When it comes to actually trying to write a grant, that's, as any of you know who've done that, that's a whole nother ballgame. And most of us volunteers have full-time jobs and families, carting them around to golf courses. So I think there could be real value in a role, just seeing if I left anything out, this freeing up staff. I think the potential scope affects probably a majority of our town committees. I'm thinking of Connect Freeport and Complete Streets, Downtown Task Force, and a big one I didn't say yet that I've heard staff in town say, as long as I've been volunteering, which is nobody knows what anyone else is doing. And I think there could be, call it a communication or integration value if this role that I can't think of a name for could really play a central, like, project management type role. So enough said, just encouraging that. I think potential funding from the Concord Gully Brook TIF is interesting. I don't know if it would be allowed. I know the TIF has some real restrictions on how that money can be used, but many elements of the TIF allow for TIF funds to be used for active living and many other types of projects in town. So theoretically, especially in the early years where the amount of money in the TIF is pretty insignificant, but significant enough to potentially fund close to a whole staff person. So probably used up all my time there. Just wanted to give that encouragement. And while I'm not on Complete Streets and any of them watching might cringe that I'm going to give an update that I might not be qualified to do, we met with Maine DOT not long back. And I just wanted to say regarding a safe routes to school exploration, we have study money for that. Maine DOT was very favorable to the potential to use the highway corridor as a potential multi-use path connection from Mallet Drive potentially to Elm Street. No need to decide whether you like or hate that idea right now, but we know a lot of residents on Oak and Guptill Streets don't like the idea of a path down their streets. We always were intrigued by what is a large piece of property from Mallet to Elm that the state owns, and they're pretty amenable to it. Whole long process, but it's being discussed. It's a potentially great way to quickly expedite bike, pedestrians, other non-vehicular traffic into the backside of town. Thank you.
Andy, before you take off, question for you on the active living coordinator, which would be called something different. Do you consider that to overlap with a position that might be called something like Parks and Recreation Coordinator, or would that be sort of a different thing?
You could probably easily create a job that now that person's very overwhelmed, but I think it could. I think it probably should be. I would think that if you think about most of our accessibility, complete streets, sustainability, arts and culture, there are many little ties. Like many of them, people like me have met with back in the day, Sally Walsh, and we start talking and realizing we should have been meeting a long time ago. Many of the things we're working on are of interest to them. So I think so. I think it could be. And the grant writing part of it, I know that's a unique skill set that maybe is asking too much for that role, but that one seems huge. There's a ton of money out there. I mean, we've let 2 major federal grants pass us by that seemed so appropriate for Mallet or Desert, like reconnecting communities. I literally meant to repair damage caused by federal projects that disconnect communities, and a lot of why we haven't gone for them is just simply bandwidth. Yeah. Thanks.
Thanks, Andy.
Well, I certainly know that I've got one staff member who staffs several of those committees that spends 10 to 15 hours a week of their time staffing committees and dealing with not just being at meetings, because they only happen every couple of weeks, but following up on those committee works. And that's our town engineer, who who doesn't have the time to follow and chase down a lot of the things that the committee would definitely like him to, but he's got 400 other duties, including building town projects and things like that. So it's a little bit further down the wish list than some immediate needs, but I don't think Andy's being untruthful or inaccurate, that it is a need long-term that we see. Staff does.
Yeah.
Councilor?
If there's grants that he has discussed with us coming up, how come we're not going outside of full-time staff and contracting with someone to put in for specific grants? I think that would be a wise use of our money. That way we don't have the whole issue of, full-time employment out of it, but yet we're still putting in for the grants. And I don't think we do that enough here.
We had a very long conversation about that last budget cycle, if I recall correctly, and part of the, at least one that I'm aware of, which was a pretty supersized grant, I think the conclusion that was come to was it was about a year too ripe, or not ripe enough, and that if it had been, 6 months from now, a year ago, would have been probably the right time with some more planning. I don't think we had the work done to support it, but I know that the Complete Streets Committee is working. They've got a separate committee looking at that to identify kind of longer range what some of those might be, so we can get ahead of them. But I think the only one that I was aware of was that, I'm gonna miss the acronym, but it was
Tiger grant?
No, it wasn't Tiger. But that's
Raise.
Yeah, the Raise, yeah.
It was Raise, Reconnecting Communities, and Safe Streets and Roads for All, which was another one that Mallet or Desert would have been great for, reducing fatalities and severe injuries on road, or preventing them in the future, yeah. But
So
they
they're-
were big, they were huge. They were the kind of grants that just kind of slay you. You need like 5 people who don't work to do them.
But I know that those committees are watching those opportunities, not those specific grant programs, but for similar opportunities, with kind of the idea of like a 6-month or a year lead time that we can do exactly what you said, whether that's bring on somebody from the outside or not, so.
Yeah, correct. The one in our crosshairs now is the Village Partnership Initiative with the state.
Yep.
It's smaller, but there's a really high likelihood we could fund, we might get awarded for like a part of Mallet, something, if we could get clear on what would we apply for. So.
And I do want to emphasize, we've been pretty successful, I think, with some of those, the smaller one, the grant funding for Mallet Drive, design work and engineering and some of the other stuff, that there's been pretty substantial flow of grant dollars. They haven't been spent yet, but we've been awarded them, and they're kind of in the process of, and we'll talk about that, I think, in this year's capital budget. Some of them are used to fund some of those parts of those grants, so, but the more we identify, the more we can apply for and the further out. So thanks, and thank you for your work on the committee back in the day, Andy.
Appreciate you're not the chairman, but what's the process? You've identified 3 grants. How do you move that forward now? What,
Yeah, we had the group that Peter met, Greg Mishu, convened a group to try to, and I think, Dan, he has spoken with you about this. I think we called it the Grant Process Committee, but it's not a real committee. It's like a bunch of people. So we said, the group agreed, one of the best ways to build a process that we could say, okay, future people, when you see an opportunity, this is how you go for it, was to go get one. So we've been meeting, assessing these opportunities, and I guess it's just really the answer is we've been collectively deciding, should we do this? Are we a fit? Could we win it? Do we have the bandwidth? And I left this part out. The two of them, the Biden-Harris infrastructure bill has this sticky provision that it has to go toward a community that's been disaffected, I guess, underserved, favors, I don't know what I'm trying to say, socioeconomically disadvantaged communities. So we also had a couple people tell us, you probably are not going to win this.
thank you.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah. One of the challenges that I've heard in the discussions with Greg and Andy and others is identifying the grants is one thing, having the bandwidth to apply for them is another, and that's where some of them were looking to us as a council for feedback, because if Adam or Caroline say, I've got 83 things that you guys are directing me to do, and now you want me to do another grant as well, something's going to fall off the other end. So is that okay with you as a council? If I don't do this project because I've got to apply for this grant? Or do we need extra staff? Do we need to contract with someone? And that's sort of been our message out so far is, look, it's probably not at the level where we're going to hire a grant coordinator, but if you need extra help getting over the hump and we need to contract with somebody for some number of hours, that we could probably find money to do that.
Right.
And it's a worthwhile grant.
And I think if we got to that raise opportunity now, we would have a much different discussion in advance of it with that committee, and based on at least the discussion we had at the council level during the last budget cycle, I would have no problem at least coming to the council and saying, how badly do you folks want to pursue this giant $3 million grant opportunity? Do we want to bring somebody in from outside at cost to us to try to do that? And I think we're there where, at least if we knew about it, when we identify these ahead of time, we'll have that discussion up here with the council, so.
Right, because many of them require a match as well, and we need to approve the match, otherwise why bother applying for the grant? Yep.
But I think that that group is actually doing a pretty good job from what I've picked up from Adam about everything you talked about applying for some smaller ones, but also keeping eyes open for these big opportunities that come along when they do.
Yeah, incredibly well-organized group. Yeah.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Annie.
Maybe Jessica, when she goes through the budget, could give us a line item of like, oh, maybe we set aside $40,000 just to contract out an employer, or, some number, maybe it's less than that.
Yep.
Yeah.
Just to show us how it could look.
Or before then, if we have opportunities coming up, don't we have a contingency budget that could be utilized? I would hate to see us lose some opportunities. If it's, so you're shaking your head, yes, if an opportunity comes up, okay, enough discussion. Thank
Oh,
you.
yeah, it would come back to you. The ones that Andy was just referring to were pretty far, at least a year in the past, so.
I'm looking down the future because I don't think we can have a grant coordinator, but, let's.
Yeah, I don't know if I'm favorable to a full-time position for
Yeah,
grants.
I'm
I think
not
I'd
for
want to try
full-time.
with some contracted writers first, like what Dan had suggested, what I'm seeing a lot of head nods for down the board, so.
It sounds like we're saying that we could have some contracted work like sooner than next year, right? Well, should we say to this committee that seems to already be in place, that seems to already be making good decisions that we like, we're willing to put $5,000 towards that if you guys find one, so that way they know, and they might feel more comfortable coming to us if we're saying, hey, this is something we would be agreeable to.
I've had that discussion with Greg and with
okay,
Adam.
yeah.
So saying, if you need the extra help, we could probably find the money to do it.
I think they're operating under that assumption now. Maybe we'll confirm that again, but I think that they're Yeah.
They are.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, your liaison to Complete Streets, right?
Yeah,
You've
I
probably
mean,
had those.
I didn't step in because everyone was covering everything, so, but yeah.
You probably got the most relevant, most current information out of all of us, so go ahead. Yeah.
And Greg is no longer the chair, he's the vice chair, so.
But yet still probably got 40,000 pounds of work on his back, right? Yeah.
All right. Any other public comment? Seeing likely none in the room, and I don't think we have any on Zoom who are here for public comment.
Nope.
So I will assume that there's no more, and we can move on to our seventh order of business, where we do all our actions and votes. The first of which is our consent agenda, which tonight has some donations to the library and some awards from our trust fund to some residents. So are there any reasons why we should consider these items separately rather than as a consent agenda? If not, Councilor Fournier, would you read item 203-22?
Yes, be it ordered that the November 29th, 2022 consent agenda be adopted.
Second.
Thank you, Councilor Lawrence. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
That's unanimous. Next up is item 204-22, which is to set a public hearing for our next meeting, which is 1 week from today, for Mass Landing Brewing, so they can get a special amusement permit, so they can provide amusement along with the other things they serve. Any discussion around this? Anything unusual about it? Or am I do the manager or the clerk before we just go ahead and set the hearing? Pretty standard. Okay. Any questions? Councilor Lawrence, you want to read the order?
Sure. Be it ordered that a public hearing be set for December 6th, 2022 at the Town Council meeting that starts at 6 p.m. in Town Council Chambers, 30 Main Street, to discuss a special amusement permit.
Second.
Thank you, Councilor Daniele. Any other discussion? Councilor Bradley?
I just read it. It says it's wanted for dancing private event space on the second floor, private event space only. And then it says, is any outdoor entertainment intended? It says yes. Is that inconsistent?
Yeah, and then it's crossed out.
Oh, the yes isn't crossed out.
Right, but just describe the outdoor entertainment piece.
Okay, so there is no.
Crossed out.
Okay, it just struck me.
I think they wouldn't have, regardless, the area, they are approved for outdoor activity there in the area behind. They have outdoor, if you've seen the area. Yeah, they've got seating, they've got eating, drinking, they're licensed for liquor out there. They've got disc golf and cornhole, so I don't think the way it's worded here would allow them to do that, but I don't see that being disruptive if they were to do outdoor music and entertainment, because there's probably nobody within a quarter mile of that location. It's facing the highway.
I just wondered what they were applying.
The upstairs, if you've been in the space, is pretty much all rental for, they're having weddings, events, meetings up there, so it's a pretty big space that's had some big groups up there already.
I just think on that application, they may have checked yes, mistakenly written in, and then when they crossed it out, they didn't cross out the yes.
Yeah. So it's really for the second floor space is what it's for, yeah. But we can find out, because we're just setting the public hearing tonight too, so we certainly have time to ask questions.
And if they need to amend it, I don't see them coming back in a problem. They've been pretty good to work with, so.
Yep. Okay, so we've got a motion on the floor. Any other questions? For setting the public hearing for next Tuesday. All in favor of setting the public hearing?
Aye.
That's everybody. So that's unanimous. We have a public hearing next Tuesday. And we might have another public hearing with item 205-22. This is for a supplemental appropriation to help purchase some police cruisers, which we have a memo about in our packet.
This one is a pretty relatively small amount. I won't say it's small because it's still $20,000. I'll just give you the rundown on the basics of it. Our police chief will be here to answer any questions next Tuesday for the public hearing or after the public hearing. I told him he could have the night off on this one because it's pretty simple. We budgeted an amount. The estimates for the cruisers, we had 2 of them in the budget, was that they were going to be come in $35,000. Those are stripped bare cars without any of the back. Those are cars that are stripped bare. They are not raw or bear cars. I might have said that in a confusing way. They're bear cars, basic cars with nothing in them. And then we also include $15,000 per vehicle for equipment and transferring existing equipment that fits in the new cars into the cars. However, when the bids came back, they were at $46,000 for the cruiser prices. We were expecting them to be a little bit higher, but not $10,000 over the last purchase price from last year. So, and that was a very uniform response we got from every dealership. The other factor was we couldn't get two cars. We couldn't get one car from anybody, and then we couldn't get any cars from anybody. We got a result for one car from Casco Bay Ford, and then Augusta Ford, or Ford dealer in Augusta, I don't know if that's the correct name, they came back with a few $100s over that second cruiser. So this wasn't going to be an issue because based on supply of what was available in the state and in New England to buy, we were not able to find two. And then after the fact, 3 or 4 came in and they called us and said, hey, we have one. We could honor this bid price if you are interested in it. So that's why it's coming to you now. We were originally going to buy one and pray that we could find a second one in time for next year's budget. However, second one came available. So now in order to purchase the second one, which we originally intended to do, we would need $20,000 extra because that would be the additional cost for the two over what we budgeted. That's very convoluted, I understand.
Councilor Regan.
And the idea is that we're purchasing it now because if we wait until our regular budget process and purchase it in the late summer of '23, the price is likely to be even higher.
The price will be higher, but these were the ones that we budgeted for 6 months ago. So
Right.
these are, or 5 months, these are the ones we approved
Right, so
6 months ago.
If this vehicle didn't appear in somebody's inventory, we would have theoretically been able to get by until our budget season coming up and purchase it.
No, but we wouldn't have had a choice. They would have just run one car 6 months longer. So it's about, to get on an order list, it's about 12 months right now. There just happened to be one that was floating around. Somebody canceled an order for, as Nate told me, 3 or 4 cruisers earlier this year, or just a month ago, and then an additional one became available.
I
to
guess
us.
the point maybe I should be more clear. The point I'm getting at is we're obviously at a disadvantage buying one here and two there, and Yarmouth is buying one here and two there, and Falmouth is buying one here and two there. This is a classic example of 8 or 10 communities getting together and telling the dealers, here's the fleet that we're going to buy, who wants to compete for it, and we have to get a little bit of more agreement on what goes into those vehicles, but we're at a complete short end of the stick in terms of negotiating with the suppliers of these vehicles. To have a $10,000 price increase on a $40,000 vehicle in 1 year?
Yeah, that's what
That's outrageous.
But that's what everybody quoted us. We're not.
Oh, I know
seeing
that,
anything less than
and
that,
that's
so.
because they can.
But I mean, but that's the same price they're selling a fleet of 10 to Augusta for and a fleet of 12
Well,
to Portland for, so.
I would be
It's-
surprised to see that, I
It's,
guess.
it's not ideal. I don't think anybody can supply those numbers right now. That's the problem. We're hearing this from every municipality. Everyone's looking around. I heard that people were buying from Massachusetts, Connecticut, wherever they can find these right now from the smaller departments, so.
Very basic economics. If you have a group buying, you have an opportunity to have a little more leverage on the vendor supplier. So I just encourage us to try and do, maybe not in this current year because we only have a couple of weeks before we start our budget process, but it seems like we're just completely at the mercy of the vehicle vendors, and that seems to be one of the items in our capital budget that keeps skyrocketing, and we could be doing something better, in my opinion.
Let me start with
That-
Councilor Fournier and then go down.
Yeah.
Well, correct me if I'm wrong, Peter, but I've been out of it for a while, but there used to be a state bid that bid a basic package, as Councilor Egan's recommended, that you could go in and you had a choice from, last time I did it, we had a choice from like 3 dealers to get them. Is that stopped? And if it has stopped, I agree completely with Councilor Egan. This is a good opportunity, like maybe for a municipal or whatever, to say, we're bidding a basic cruiser package. If you want something in addition to that, but that used to be done, and maybe it's stopped.
I haven't seen that in the 10 years since I've been here. I'm sure it did happen at one time. The last group vehicle bid that I saw, Daryl, would have been, you would have remembered it probably would be, we had a ambulance bid that was with 7 or 8 different towns, that there was kind of a uniform bid number. I'm happy to, that's actually the collective bidding group at GPCOG. I can talk to them and see if there's a reason they haven't done it. I'm assuming that it's something that everybody's interested in. There's a reason that it hasn't been done. I don't know if the level, I mean, cruisers are pretty basic. We buy them bare. Most communities do, you know, just with the front done, and then the radio package has to get put in, the lights have to get put on, the back seat, you know, you get a hard plastic bench if you want anything different, your roll cage, your cage has to be different.
all those things, yep.
So is that something you'll ask the GPCOG collective
I
bidding
certainly-
folks
I
about
certainly will,
for
yep.
next year, yeah? Yeah.
Or for immediately, but I'm assuming there's a reason that they're not doing it, but I don't know what it is, so I don't want to guess.
But even if we did that right now, there isn't any inventory. There's nothing. I mean, so
The result isn't going to be quicker, it's just going to be maybe a few $1,000s difference if we get the volume, but the big problem is there's just not supply.
there's no supply. So that's, no matter what we bargain for, it's, yeah, sorry. That's the issue. So
It's
this is
convenient for them and very inconvenient for us. yes.
Exactly. It's what they call a seller's market.
Councilor Daniele?
No, it's fine.
My final point is, every time, and correct me if I'm wrong, Peter, but it used to be, we had a very detailed capital budget which looked at fleet replacement. And every time we bump it a year, one way or another, we're gonna pay for that down the road, possibly in 4 or 5 years, because we get out of sync. And I know on rescues coming up, we're out of sync on rescues, and we're gonna be seeing a huge cost increase on rescues, even if we can get it. So my frustration I have on the capital budget, I know it's my pet peeve, is we have not adjusted our purchasing to fall in line where we have a comfortable level on that. So that's a discussion for another day when we get into capital budgets, but this is an example of when we think we change something, you know, it's not gonna affect a lot. It does have a major change, and it affects us down the road.
Took the words out of my mouth. It would not be a crisis, to answer, the real simple answer to John's question, it's not a crisis, no. We'll get by fine for the next 6 months, but 12 months from now, we're still running that same vehicle that's now got 110, 120,000 as a duty vehicle instead of 80,000 on it. You start to see cars breaking down in the middle of shifts, we start to see higher, it's not, none of it is like, oh my God, there's this one emergency crisis, it's just reduced efficiency, and the longer it goes, the higher it gets. So, you know, there's no right answer, there's no wrong answer. There's a scheduled replacement that seems to work very well right now with little to no downtime on the cruisers. The longer we go on that, to get to Councilor Fournier's point, the more you start losing that from very good operating efficiency to average operating efficiency.
And purchasing efficiency.
I guess I'd wonder, like, with efficiencies of the new vehicles or whatnot, you know, are other communities getting further than we are, and are we just being super conservative in that number or not? But also we're asking for $20,000 extra dollars, and it looks like it's 11 to 12,000 more dollars per cruiser that we're talking about. So, is there a reason we're asking for 20,000 and not the full amount?
Good eye. There's a little bit of wiggle room in the changeover line there, where we would have been able to absorb a couple $1,000s probably from that bid amount, but not 10, not 12. The 2 probably isn't an issue, but the
Should we say it in an amount that's slightly more, because we can always just put the money back? It just seems like I'd rather be sure and not have to come back.
we won't have to come back, but anything over, I mean, you can be assured anything over that doesn't go into a black hole. It does go back to the police equipment reserve fund eventually, so.
He's
if
saying
you
the other
wanna-
way around. Should we increase this
Yeah,
to
yeah.
up to $24,000?
I'd be fine with that. That's all, I mean, you don't have to make that decision tonight. That could be 25, that could be 30, that could be 50. If it's 50 and we only spend 20, the 30, at the end, when the vehicle purchase is closed out, within a year, it goes back into the police department reserve account anyways, so,
But if it's too small,
yeah, I won't be back for $2,000, but if
you would
if
just
it's,
find it somewhere?
I think in the 15,000 that was budgeted for the equipment changeover, that could be 9, that could be 12, that could be 13. If they had to buy new equipment for the vehicle, that 15 would pretty much cover the new purchases, so. But we don't really know until they go, how much of the equipment is functional for another 10 years, how much of it will get 5 years out of it, whether they say, hey, your radio in this one's no good, oh, the cage, or it fit the old model, but it's not gonna fit this model. There's a lot of rolling the dice when we get new cars and they don't know what fits and what goes into the new ones. So it's kind of like as you go, each year that number changes.
For what it's worth, the Police Advisory Committee had sent out a survey to all the patrol officers. We got about 10 responses or so, unsolicited, anonymous, or I guess solicited, but they're anonymous. And the top 2 or 3 themes from the majority of them by far were cars is one of them. You know, our cars are old, they're breaking down, they're not reliable, we have issues, we have to take them out of service, we don't have the right number of cars we need per shift. So it was one of their top 3 issues for sure, so I wouldn't want to delay this, but all the ideas we talked about are good for budget consideration for next year,
Yeah,
for sure.
I completely agree with that.
I got a note here. I'll talk to the guy.
Okay. All right, so
No action required, just, yep.
Counselor Daniele, it's up to you to read the order.
Be it ordered that a public hearing be set for December 6, 2022 at the Town Council meeting that starts at 6 p.m. in Town Council Chambers, 30 Main Street, to discuss a supplemental appropriation pursuant to Section 6.08A of the Freeport Town Charter in the amount of $20,000 for the capital purchase of police cruisers.
Second.
Thank you, Counselor Lawrence. Any other discussion? All in favor, setting the public hearing?
Aye.
That's everybody, 6-0. Thank you. 6-0. Next item, 206-22, regarding a new recycling center tractor, which I assume Mr. Gibson is here to talk to us about. And I think we have a memo on this one as well.
I'll try to be as brief as I can. This is replacing a skid steer tractor that's at the recycle facility. It's 18 years old with a tractor. One of the main reasons Suzanne wanted to go with a tractor is they also want to do their own mowing, which is going to save about $3,000 a year on mowing and bring it in-house. As we're finding, it's very difficult to depend on outside services. Y'all were just discussing the cars and stuff. We've had a fire truck sitting in my shop down there for 4.5 weeks waiting on a radiator. So anything you can do in-house is best.
Counselor Egan.
So your memo notes that we've budgeted this amount in our last budget process for this current fiscal year. So this is just the execution of that budget authority, and you're actually going out to buy the equipment.
It is, sir.
A savings of a little over $1,000, which is great.
We had a little bit of trouble when I submitted the first bid. I didn't like some of the results that we got back. So I sat down and talked to Suzanne, and we sent another bid out. That's why this is late getting into you. But this is the money that was already appropriated in the last budget season.
Great.
Counselor Fournier.
Just got a quick question, that the John Deere and the Bobcat didn't meet specs. What was it that didn't meet?
The engine horsepower, as you know, Mr. Earl, from a 32 horse to a 52 horse. That's big. And the other thing is the Bobcat was not a tractor. It was a utility vehicle. It was one of the little low-to-the-ground vehicles that everything had to be mounted on the front.
So the John Deere was like a 30 horse or something?
32.
And, okay, you spec what?
52.
Okay, thank you.
And the other thing, Mr. Earl, is the broom. Ms. Suzanne wanted a self-contained broom, which when it sweeps, it puts it in a bucket instead of just sweeping it across the parking lot. And John Deere and Bobcat couldn't do that.
Thank you.
Earl, thank you for including, based on recent comments and recent bid processes, your solicitation list is very helpful for everyone to see the, 10, 15, 12, I guess, places that you solicited the bids from and what you got back. So thank you.
And I plan on continuing that.
Yeah, it's a good idea.
It's the new standard.
Mm-hmm. I like it. Any other questions for Mr. Gibson? Counselor Bradley, would you read item 206-22?
Be it ordered that a bid award go to Wallingford Equipment of Auburn, Maine for a new recycling center tractor with attachments in the amount of $68,900.
Second.
Thank you, Counselor Lawrence. Any other discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
That's 6-0. Thanks, councilors, and thank you, Mr. Gibson. Okay, we are up to item 207-22, which is our next to last item, which I think Councilor Bradley is going to present to us, and we have a memo on this one as well.
Thank you. I'm presenting on behalf of Councilor Fournier and myself to request action on the council to create a committee to deal with potential collaboration between the town and the sewer district with respect to funding the improvements to the plant and associated items, which include force mains and also sort of disinfection processes at the plant that are not included in the current proposal for improvements to the plant. And the idea is that we would form a committee of people who have experience in the town and have expressed an interest in the sewer district in order to determine basically whether, I mean, the base issue is whether there's a way in which the town could or should support the sewer district in funding its services to clean the sewer because of the general benefits it provides as well as the specific benefits it provides to its users. We got involved in this discussion initially because of concerns about connection fees were being charged by the sewer district for modifications to buildings in the downtown, which affected the revisioning. And since then, the issue has expanded to include, you know, a greater inquiry into the whole nature of the sewer district, its relationship to the town, funding its projects, and governance of the sewer district and participation by the town. The manager of the sewer district has been, I think, incredibly transparent and helpful in terms of presenting information about his operations, about his budget. He's open to talking about all this range of issues. And we had an initial meeting with people who have sort of set this up for the consideration of the committee, which I'm asking you to form. And the idea is nothing. This committee will be limited in time and duration to 6 months. That it will be advisory to the council and present alternatives that seem reasonable to the council. I mean, to present alternatives that the council might consider to be reasonable, and to present information that will help the council make decisions about whether to help fund and if so, under what terms and conditions. And the people who are identified are Councilor Fournier and myself, Peter, Joseph, the town manager, and Carolyn, if he includes her, Lee Harris and Sally Leland from the district, Rod Regier, who is a resident who's a former town councilor who's had a lot of involvement with sewer, and is actually, he wrote I recommend it as reading to anybody. He wrote an article about the sewer district before the sewer district, and it's really fascinating to hear what the sewers were like before there was a sewer district. Dan Bacon from the FEDC, who's also someone who works in that project in Scarborough and he's really interested in sewer. Brett Richardson, who's on the FEDC, and Brent Bridges, who is the consultant from that's advising the sewer district, who has a wealth of experience in terms of funding. The group that has set it up has sort of done a fair amount of work in terms of identifying things, but it hasn't really had its first meeting with the committee, and there's a lot to be learned from these people. There are two people that are also, we'd like you to allow us to ask. We aren't sure how they'll respond because we haven't been able to get back in touch with them. Mark Winter, who was here during the earmarking process, who's initially expressed an interest, formerly Senator Snow's administrative assistant in the state, a local resident, who has expressed an interest, and Clint Goodenow, who is a person who has been, I think, rational about the harbor and sewer district issues, who I think has a wealth of experience about the resource and how it's affected. So this was brought to the FEDC. I'm trying to do the preliminary work so you'd feel comfortable knowing there were other people who thought this was a good idea. The FEDC developed a motion that says the FED supports the town exploration of all possible funding sources for the sewer district, including external sources, potential town funding sources, federal funding, and any other sources of funding, and that the town form a committee to bring recommendations to the town council. In other words, they support this request. The only thing that's not in the motion that I think we either should add or we should at least understand is that when we're talking about funding, we're not just talking about money. We're talking about the conditions and terms under which funding might be offered or presented as a collaborative effort. So, you know, you might find that the recommendation comes back to use TIF money, for instance. It's been raised, so I just want to put it out as an example. But you might find, well, the TIF money is available, but only if certain conditions or terms are met, and the sewer district accepts those. And the sewer district might not want that. But those issues would also be on the table for discussion at the committee level and be part of the recommendations, or at least the alternatives, that the group would bring back to the council for consideration. We would not ignore the fact that any financial involvement that was recommended might the committee might think would involve a greater participation by the town in sewer district issues than currently occurs. Right now, it's pretty much standalone, separate. And if you're going to put town money into it, that might not continue to be true. So those kinds of issues would be on the table as well. So that's the request. We're ready to get going. You know, I'll tell these people in a short period of time if you agree to it, and I would expect we'd be back in front of you as part of the revision process in time for the budget discussions.
Questions for Councilor Bradley? Councilor Egan.
Adam, and I don't expect an answer tonight, but I'm reading on the page 2 of the memo that the engineer consultant cautioned most federal grant sources available to the district would reduce the grant that rural development is considering.
Yes. So that's one of the reasons why we might consider going after grants ourselves, right? Because we might have areas that we could get funding for that were not within the purview of the rural development grant and would not reduce it. But if we simply gave the district money to do the things that they've applied to do, then rural development, this opinion would reduce the amount of grant that was available from the federal government. So you got to be, what he's really telling us is be careful about how you do this. Be cognizant of what sources you use and how they relate in the process of funding this through rural development. And, you know, without getting into the weeds, it's my sense that the sewer district could do all of this initial stuff on their own through rural development. They wouldn't really need us to help, but there are other parts of what aren't in the proposal that they don't have the funding for and would benefit from our collaboration. And if we think, and you know, I'm sort of tending in this way, I'll be transparent about it, is thinking about the sewer district is more than just a place where you clean up dirty water. In other words, it's not just a service to the people who produce the sewage. It's a service to the entire community in a variety of different ways that are critically important to us as a community. The quality of the harbor, recreational uses, the clamors, all of the water issues, all of the recreational issues along the shore, the boating industry in the town are all related to how well the sewer district does this. That may convince people that that's a good thing for us to participate in. So, but to your question, John, I'm sorry to go off, is this guy gave us a caution in the middle of this. Don't go willy-nilly producing funds that are within the purview of a grant that rural development is considering, because if you do, you may find them very delighted to reduce the amount of the grant that they give.
How big, do we know how big the grant is that they're pursuing at rural development?
Yes, currently it's a $17.5 million grant. They're they may already know they have it. I haven't talked to Lee in a week. What they're not sure of is how much of it's going to be grant and how much of it's going to be loan.
Oh, okay. Yeah, because I was going to say, it says grant and loan in the front. I was wondering what the ratio was.
They don't know yet.
Yeah.
That's discretionary with the federal government. Okay. They obviously want more grant than they have loan.
And does the sewer district contract with Mr. Bridges for pursuing grant opportunities, or is that an engineering contract?
he was instrumental in identifying the rural development grant for this project, for the sewer district. And he put the project together, and he put the grant proposal together with Lee's, complete involvement.
Yeah,
and,
sure.
But he was instrumental in that. And he wants to continue participating in this because I think he thinks that the collaboration between the town and the sewer district makes sense. And he's already provided our little group examples of other communities that have moved from a standalone sewer district to a collaboration between the town and the sewer district in many different ways. He says you ought to consider thinking, or at least ought to think about those things, and that's stuff that I would think this committee would look at in terms of presenting you with alternatives that you might consider if you are of a mind to.
Other questions?
That's a pretty common role for utility engineers, though, John, to go further on that. They do specialize because these projects, sorry, Ed, these projects are huge usually, so they're very comfortable
well,
walking into a room. Hey, you've got a $50 million water treatment plant upgrade, and the jaw drops off the city.
Yeah.
And they say, well, here's how you can get half of that funded by federal sources, and now you've only got $25 million to fund. And their jaw half falls off. I mean,
I'm assuming WC is Woodard and Curran.
yes.
Yes, sorry.
So they're a highly reputable firm, do municipal work all over the place. I'm not questioning that. I'm just wondering if the contract that the Freeport Sewer District has is for engineering services, or is it for capital planning and grant writing? Sounds like it's a little of both.
I think it's hourly at this point. The longer they're dragging them in on a lot of different meetings, so.
Councilor Daniele?
Ed, my question would be, how confident are you in that list of names versus opening up hey, apply to be a part of this group?
Every person on here was picked, and identified, and then talked to because of a sense of experience and interest in the sewer. So, I mean, I can go through it. Brett Richardson has been involved in this from the beginning.
No, I know all the people, but I'm just wondering, sorry to cut you off, but
no,
just,
sorry. I have no interest in going out to the general public and finding out who else might want to be on the committee. This is the committee that I think we could start from day one, get a product out of it. It would be a competent project, competent group, a lot of experience and a lot of know-how and a lot of intelligence, and come back to you with recommendations that I'd feel comfortable with. If you want to go out to the public, go ahead, but that delays this in ways that just don't seem productive to me.
would these be open meetings that like a resident could just jump into? I'm just wondering how open and I mean, I know ultimately it's our decision, so anybody can come and talk to us, and we can just take this or leave this, but.
I assume if it's a committee we established, they would need to be open to the public.
If you vote to create it, it becomes an official government board. If all these people decide to meet without the council's blessing and without a charge, they are not necessarily a public entity. But if you establish it, they become a public governmental body under Maine state law.
Yeah, a number of these people made it pretty clear to me that they didn't want to be just on an ad hoc rotating group of people who talked about this at breakfast on Saturday morning. They wanted to have some official status and standing, and if that means we have to give notice of the meetings and have people come, that's fine. I have no objection to that at all.
To Jake's point, before we go to Daryl, is there anybody on there who represents the ratepayer? Is there anybody on there who is a ratepayer and would advocate for
Sally.
them? No, I didn't hear her name on Ed's list, though.
Who?
Sally's on there. She's a ratepayer, and she's also on the board.
Was she on your list?
Sally Leland, she's
Sally
on the list.
Leland.
Yeah, she is, oh, okay. Okay. Did you have a question, Daryl?
I just think to the whole point that the meetings
Rod
should
is-
be
I think
open.
Rod is as well.
It should be open and more people can come in for input. We're not looking to exclude anyone. One of the goals we had, and we discussed this quite a while, is to have a working committee very focused, timely, to get in, get the report done, and get it back to us. And I think we got some great talent, and thankful for all those people coming. If someone comes up back and says, hey, we have something to offer, I don't think they're going to say, we don't want to hear from you. But we are trying to get focused to get the committee to going, to come back with a good workable idea, in a reasonable amount of time.
And my question is, and we've talked about this, but just to confirm, the committee is going to explore all possible funding options, including town funding, but we're not binding the town to commit to funding or helping with funding. We're just saying, let's explore what that might look like. Is that correct?
It's purely advisory. It is not, everybody understands we have no authority to decide anything, but we will use our hard work and effort and judgment to present you with alternatives that make sense to us. And if there are competing alternatives, we'll present the competition between the ideas and give you the reasons why one versus the other from our perspective, makes some sense.
And then, this is just in the memo, but it looks like Brett Richardson already thought of the caution between tying a particular funding mechanism to a particular TIF. So in other words, I wouldn't expect the committee to come back and recommend a particular TIF to us, but if FEDC is recommending a TIF and it would affect the sewer district, then sure, it makes sense to talk about them, but, you know, they should be also independent recommendations. If the TIF passes, if it doesn't pass, these are the options for the sewer.
I hadn't thought about this committee being limited in any way to any particular funding source. I would think the committee would think about, and it has the people on it to explore the conditions in terms of all different things that are available to fund these sorts of projects. And they'll probably, I know TIF's going to be one of the things they talk about, because it's on Brett's mind, as everybody knows, and he thinks it makes a lot of sense already, and it will be one of the things we talk about.
I think the TIF is probably going to come to us through FEDC, the specific TIF recommendation. I think that's what it says in our rules and procedures. I'll put it that way.
That doesn't keep us from saying. I'm just saying.
You can add to it, influence it.
We'll just tell you what we think about using a TIF, and you and FEDC can go, talk about it in terms of whether you actually do it or not. This isn't doing anything more than just giving you ideas about what your options are, and let you explore the ones you think make sense.
I'm on board. Yep. Any other questions?
No, I just want to give Ed credit.
I would
for
love to
putting
know if anybody has any concerns, because I'd like to address them in the process if you do. This seems to me to be a very positive offer on the part of this committee to do the work of the council in the revisioning process and moreover in the work of the town. But I don't know how all of you think about that.
I think it's a great way to go. I mean, this is what we need. What can we do to fix the problem that we have? So put a committee together, get the best experts on there. So I'm for it.
I know I'm on the committee, but I will tell you, when I was on the board, there wasn't a trust level that we could ever get to where we are today. So what I'm finding refreshing is the honest dialogue that we had, and there was some that was good and some that they didn't want to have, but we had it. And I thought that was healthy. I'm excited. I think that, we may not adopt everything that comes out of this, and that's fine, but there may be 2 or 3 things that come out. And if we get that far ahead, that's further than we were.
Councilor Egan?
I'm concerned about the next step after the recommendation comes forward, that the pitching to taxpayers in the community, 24% of which are served by the sewer district, 74 to 76% are not, having a voice in their tax dollars going to a government entity that they don't participate or get any benefit from, so, in their opinion. I don't disagree that, or I agree with you that the sewer district provides a lot of benefits besides somebody's pipe connection. I completely agree with that. But I'm not sure that there would be widespread consensus on that point. And so I think it would be a wise move to just be well aware that any recommendation that comes forward for town budget to support a particular project or absolutely for any kind of ongoing support for the sewer district is probably going to be quite a discussion.
Sure. Peter? John, I would not lose any sleep. I think Ed has taken the very big step here of appointing many or recommending several people who probably share that opinion more than you do, but who have been willing to put aside their any predisposition to kind of explore these things. I think we've already had many discussions. I think there's a wide range, just individually, not as this group, with some of the people in there. I think there's a wide range of opinions everywhere from kind of stronger concern than what you just said to much more liberal in the other direction than what you're probably worried about. So it's think, balanced group of opinions, and the only thing that those of us with strong opinions have agreed is that we'll explore everything out there and not make up our mind until we look at all of it. So I think credit to Ed, who's violently forced some of us to get beyond some biases and to take an open mind approach and look at these things impartially. So everything that you said is very good for us to keep in mind, and I don't think you have to worry about that not being kept in mind.
All right, Councilor Bradley. I'll give you the honor of reading the be it ordered, even though you've just read one, but I think this is near and dear to your heart, so.
So be it ordered that a sewer funding task force be established to exist for a period of 6 months for the purpose of exploring all possible funding sources for the sewer district, including external sources, potential town funding sources, federal funding, and other sources of funding, with the goal of bringing recommendations on the above-mentioned subject to the town council before its completion. And be it further ordered that the following individuals be appointed to the sewer funding task force: Peter Joseph, Town Manager; Ed Bradley and Daryl Fournier, Town Councilman; Lee Aris, Manager of the Sewer District; Sally Leland, Member of the Sewer District and a resident of District 3; Rod Regier, former Town Councilor and a resident of District 3; Dan Bacon, Representative of FEDC; Brett Richardson, Executive Director of FEDC; and Brent Bridges, Woodard and Curran Consultant to the Sewer District. I would also like to add to that list 2 other names that we could add if they agree. And one is Mark Winters, and the other is Clint Goodenow.
Second.
That's a Councilor Fournier. Any other questions, discussion? All right, all in favor of creating the sewer funding task force?
Aye.
Aye.
That's everybody, 6-0. Thank you, Councilor Bradley, for all the effort, and Councilor Fournier, that you guys have put in to date. Look forward to the next 6 months. With that, we're up to item 208-22 for another task force. This one focused on housing that Vice Chair Egan is going to present to us.
Thank you. This is the formal action to follow up on the discussion that we've had for the past several months during the fall, culminating in the presentation from the Social and Racial Equity Committee in October of a report, which you all received copies of current housing status and glaring needs in the community, and some demographic and census information to illustrate how certain segments of our real estate market are completely unaffordable to many residents in our community. And the final recommendation of that report, which was presented, was to create a housing committee. We had some conversation about whether or not it would be a formal committee or similar to what we just talked about, a task force with a shelf life, to kind of just get it moving and not keep debating the formation issue. I'm presenting this evening a recommendation similar in structure to what we just talked about for a 12-month task force to focus on housing issues. And we have the benefit of having a very successful, longstanding nonprofit in our community called Freeport Housing Trust, which owns and operates successfully a number of, I think it's 170 units that they have in the community, a wide array of folks that they're serving through that housing. They have done some ownership projects as well. Not all of their units are reserved or restricted to the very lowest income, although they do serve very low-income households in our community. They're trying to serve as broad a slice of the community as possible. And they have agreed to participate in this task force. So they bring a lot of horsepower and a lot of data and information and knowledge of the community to be on this. So to kind of kick it off, I provided a memo. You can disregard some of the names because those were just a hypothetical suggestion in an email, but I have some confirmation of some folks that have agreed and have indicated an interest in serving on this 12-month task force community. committee. But the particulars of what the committee might focus on, they're likely to derive and focus on the issues that each of them bring to that discussion. But as a starter set, I'm suggesting a couple of things that we can put forward. That would be some particular active steps that the council might take to spark a development project. We've got two that have come forward here recently, and I think there's an opportunity to maybe see if we could get a few more coming forward to actually just create more housing stock, period, in our community. I think it's also, we've had a lot of conversation about feedback from developers and other property owners about our zoning ordinance and our permitting process, and encourage this group to focus on recommending 3, maybe even more, particular top zoning and ordinance changes so that we can address some of the immediate barriers that projects might be facing in terms of permitting. And I think, you know, we have a state law that's in place now that allows for development of accessory dwelling units. Our zoning ordinance actually already allows it, so we don't have to focus on an authorization there, but I think we could be promoting it. I'm not suggesting, as other communities have done, to start putting dollars out there to encourage that, but that was just an example of how one community is encouraging the development of accessory dwelling units. But I think we could be doing a lot more to be advertising how people might go about it and what the process might look like. So those are just a couple of the things that I'm suggesting. We can tighten that up as the committee gets going, and if there are other recommendations that come forward, I'm sure the committee would welcome input from the council in terms of what it might focus on. I do have a starter set of some names, although this would be absolutely an open and transparent committee that would have publicized meetings and high encouragement from members of the community to participate. The folks that I'm putting forward for an initial composition of the task force would be Matt Peters from the Freeport Housing Trust, Mitch Ruda from the Freeport Planning Board, Brett Richardson from FEDC. I think we're going to need to get some cloning for Brett because he seems to be in demand everywhere. Vanessa Farr, who participated with the principal group in our downtown plan and is actually a professional planner, used to be the planner in the town of Yarmouth, has vast experience in municipal planning, has a lot of capacity to bring to that. Mari Miev, who was on the SREC committee and was instrumental in contributing to that report that you got. I have not been able to contact this person, but someone from the construction industry. I'm suggesting that we try and reach out to Drew Wing from Zachow Construction. Zachow is very busy in this community as well as other communities, and Drew is a particular a community asset. I've not been able to reach him to see if he'd be interested. And then I would like to suggest that I can be the council liaison to the committee. So that is a starter set of some names, some folks that have identified an interest in participation here. And I've tried to get a balance of different disciplines and perspectives from planning and economic development.
Questions for Councilor Egan? Ed?
So, John, it doesn't, a lot of this relates to the downtown revisioning, but it doesn't specifically relate to, you don't specifically identify how this effort would merge with the downtown revisioning, if at all. What are your thoughts about that?
I think almost any of the projects that are identified in the downtown plan are only going to be better if we have more residents living in the downtown. And that, if you talk to Brett or any planner, they will tell you the #1 economic development action a community can take is to increase 24-hour residency of people living in their downtown community. That creates much more of a consumer demand than just the shopper or the morning coffee commute or whatever. So I think that it's integral to the downtown plan, because I think, in my opinion, adding more downtown residents and residences, more units, in our downtown is a foundation block of the downtown revision plan.
As I look at it more closely, I see you do actually refer specifically to the housing projects in the downtown.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And I'll point out that the downtown plan talked about residents that live within a radius of downtown. So the project itself might not be downtown, but for instance, the new development on Desert Road contributes to the number of people that live and shop and work, or that shop and work and could easily bike or walk downtown, even though the project itself doesn't reside in that little square box we drew around the downtown area.
Right. And, you know, we're certainly the breweries have recognized the affinity locations of the south end of our main street. And that could very well be other industries that pop up to serve populations that are more proximal for bike rides and pedestrian access. So I don't think we should necessarily think that we know exactly what the definition of downtown is geographically. I think that will evolve a little bit over time.
Councilor Lawrence?
Yeah, I also don't think it should just be limited to downtown. It should be the whole town, because that's what, not everybody can live downtown, for one thing, but it's a whole town wide to bring people to this town that we don't have starter homes. We don't have the next level homes. We have very low income housing and we have high income housing. That does not bode well.
Any other questions? Councilor Egan, do you want to read the be it ordered on this one?
Sure. Be it ordered that a housing task force be established to exist for a period of 12 months to study the problem of housing affordability in Freeport and make recommendations to the town council for actions the town could take and policies the town could establish to encourage the development of affordable housing. Be it further ordered that the following individuals initially be appointed to the housing task force: Matt Peters, Mari Mia, Mitch Ruda, to the extent, well, I can't name them because we haven't talked to them. A representative from the local construction industry, Brett Richardson of FEDC, Vanessa Farr of the principal group, and myself as council liaison, John Egan.
Second.
Thank you, Councilor Daniele. Any other discussion? All in favor of creating the housing task force?
Aye.
That's all of us, 6-0. Thank you, councilors, and thank you, John, for putting the proposal together and kicking it off. I think it's something that a lot of people have been asking us for, and I think you're going to get a lot of interested voices at the table. So look forward to seeing what comes of that. So that concludes our action items for tonight, but we have a closely related item to do with housing and then some, which it's got my name next to it, but I think it's more likely that our town manager is going to give us an update.
Oh, I was thinking that that's more likely going to be the vice chair who would give us an update on that, because
Most recent meeting.
No, I can just kick off a little bit. I think we've all got little pieces to contribute. We also have Sarah from Freeport Community Services on Zoom as a participant. If and when, Sarah, you think you've got to chime in on something, please feel free to let me know. I see you there. So we did have a recent meeting to follow up our last discussion at the council level. Councilor Egan was there, Councilor Bradley was there. We had a local affordable housing developer who's working on a local project. This was specific to people on ERA that may have a place to go. Oh, thank you. Thanks for the mic. May or may help them have a place to go. We met with a hotel developer, or sorry, a hotel owner, one of the local hotel owners that is not housing all of the people on the ERA program, but one of the small populations, or the larger populations, I should say, of the whole group on the ERA program. Sarah, Mike Tausik from FCS, and Greg
From the governor's office.
From the governor's office, her housing expert. So Greg Payne is that Greg Payne. Yep. And Melanie, obviously. I was going to forget somebody, and they're right in the room. Wow, that's about the worst possible person to forget. So we discussed some of the developments the state is either going to or is 100% likely to extend the ERA program with additional money that has been recovered that was lost in the treasury transfer process essentially until the end of December. There is a proposal. This is definitely, we were cautioned that this is not a done deal at all, and actually it may be far from a done deal, but there will be a proposal, we understand, likely brought to the legislature in the coming weeks, probably in the next 2 weeks, 1 to 2 weeks, to provide emergency housing funding continuing through the winter. That is not a done deal, but that is something that is likely to have a lot of debate. I know that there has been some funding that's identified as available, but that's going to depend on a lot of other people. We have our state rep in the room again with us tonight. I think she and our local reps and most of the local reps in the Portland area and senators are pretty much on board, and I think that there's broad support from this area. The question is wider parts of the state where this isn't an issue, if there will be support to raise and appropriate state funding to take care of this issue. So I don't want to give any hope or any details because I don't think that the proposal is formal, and I don't think it's been considered by the people who haven't even been sworn into office yet that need to consider it. But there is movement, and there is something that's coming forward to address that immediate need. What that does not do is it does not address the long-term, springtime until infinity need of homelessness, housing insecurity, housing shortage. It's tied very closely to what Councilor Egan just discussed, the housing affordability problem. It's not the same problem, but one feeds into the other for sure. The more affordable housing there is, the less of an emergency the less likely somebody is to become fully homeless if there's an affordable housing program that suits their family income level. So I think we were asked 2 things at the last meeting. I handed out a draft just of some language. There was a question about whether the council was there. I think it was discussed that the council would like to probably take some PR. These are just talking points, and I drafted something that's roughly in the form of a letter, but I'm assuming that everybody's going to have a different opinion of what they want that to look like. So I don't even know if now is the correct time. I think the council chair and I discussed a little bit about whether we are at the correct time to provide input or not, but that's really a full council decision. That's not a me decision. And I've also got these, we were asked for some additional stats. These are estimates from Freeport Community Services just on the total cost. I know Councilor Bradley, you had asked us to look at what the actual numbers are. We don't have actual numbers for some of the groups, but these are more detailed than the broad brush discussions that we had at the last meeting. And I think I can just summarize here kind of the more detailed examples. The Best Western, there are 30 households at the hotel currently. Housing cost is currently $110 a night. 30 households are $99,000 a month, or $1.2 million roughly per year. That is the portion that's covered by ERA right now. So that is the amount of state money that is going to that hotel to house people in it. The food, non-food prescription cost per month, 30 households, $25,000 per month. That's a rough estimate, $300,000 per year. That is a GA figure. If we continue to see that demand there, keep in mind that is a 70-30 split state and local. The state picks up 70% of that. That is for other items above and beyond the housing needs. So food that's not necessarily always provided, non-food items and prescriptions, medical care, things like that. So the total cost for that facility, this is not all GA and it's not all ERA. It's a combination of all different public money that's going to support that, is $124,000 roughly per month, or roughly $1.5 million per year. That's the housing cost for 30 households at that inn. The Casco Bay Inn is listed here. We won't get into detail. I like the way Sarah put it together, not receiving ERA. Those people are at living on the dime of the Portland General Assistance Office, and Portland has so far done an admirable job of honoring the claim, the promise that they made that as long as those families that were placed there in the spring stay there, that they will be on Portland's dime. And they have held that. We listed it here only because there's no legal obligation for them to continue to honor it. So we want that to be like a placeholder that, hey, this could drop on us anytime, but I do want to give them credit. They've done what they said they were going to do, and they have not done, as they said, they are not doing anything more than what they originally committed to do. So fair on them to say that, and good for their taxpayers, the same way that I think we would look out for our taxpayers if we were in that situation. Other Freeport hotels, the various hotels on Route 1 South, approximately 20 households sheltered by hotels other than the Best Western, the Casco Bay Inn. That's primarily the 44 North Hotel and the Econo Lodge, but a few of them have also participated. Other ones have participated in the program. And the housing cost at $140 per night. Oh, sorry, I'm on the wrong one. The housing costs $140 per night at 20 households, roughly $1 million per year. That's ERA money, state money that's going to those 20, average of 20 households. And the potential food, non-food, RX costs, prescription costs, $200,000 per year. We are not seeing that because not all of those are not, few to any of those 20 households have qualified for those needs under GA, but some of them have. So the potential exposure is that we could be responsible for up to 30% of $200,000 per year if that number of people stayed there. And then the 31 households whose ERA is ending, we did not have specifics on this. I know we asked for that, but the CAP agencies, the community action plan agencies, who are the ones that are distributing the ERA funding, that's not public information that they've been giving out yet, and they're not at this point willing to do that. So Mike and Sarah estimated the rough allowance for GA would be about $2,000 a month. We can only assume that that would be similar to what the ERA cost might be for rent. So an estimate there for those 31 households would be $750,000 per year, roughly. That's a potential exposure. That is not an actual expenditure of town funds yet. That's just the potential ERA cost that we're estimating the other 31 families may be receiving. Councilor Bradley, yes.
John, go ahead.
I was just going to provide a little bit of context for sort of where these numbers are residing, and that the Federal Emergency Rental Assistance or Relief Act, I think it's Emergency Rental Assistance, ERA, was announced to be ending at the end of November, which is tomorrow. My understanding is that through some very challenging but successful negotiations, that funding may be rearranged to extend through December, but that the ERA, federal pass-through ERA to support these households, particularly the ones in the hotels, is over on December 31st. And so, as Peter said at the beginning of this, there is going to be hopefully a discussion and a presentation of legislation coming up quickly for the state legislature to come up with some solution. If, that's not a guarantee. And so I think the purpose of looking at or the context of looking at these numbers is there's a possibility that the town of Freeport could be looking at having to figure out what to do with a significant number of these households that are here that have had support up to now for their emergency housing, many of whom are unable to work because of immigration status, despite strong efforts on their part to find work and find a way to work. That's a legal status that's the immigration whole sector needs to tackle. But in the meantime, we wanted to just get a handle on what this might look like if there are suddenly 20 to 50 families that are without any place to live and any income. So there are some hopeful signs that there might be some emergency extension from the state. There's also some conversation that a number of the families in one of the hotels may be relocated. That hotel owner owns a number of properties as well in other communities and may have some other logistic reasons to relocate some of those families, which would mean that they would be able to at least have a place to stay if there is funding. But if there's no funding for that, then that nobody could expect a business owner to just put people up for forever. So there's, you know, it's a crisis. It's a crisis that many people saw coming months ago, when there was no supply of any units anywhere, and the hotels were a last-minute effort to try and find a place for many of these households to be in out of the cold. And that money has now reached its legal life, so to speak, and we're faced with really high critical needs here. There are at least 6 households with an expectant baby coming. And so just imagine that for a moment, expecting a new baby and you're not sure if you got a place to live next month. So there's a lot of gravity on this, and there are a lot of people that are actually trying to solve the problem. A lot of advocates, a lot of organizations, a lot of agencies. There are plenty of social service agencies in and around Portland that are communicating with Freeport Community Services, who is doing an incredible job without the staff that any of those Portland agencies have. So there's a lot of good communication about what to do, and at least from the conversation that Ed and I participated in, a clear priority that is what is best for those households is at the top of that list in terms of decisions and impacts.
Councilor Bradley?
I guess my question, I still have questions about this list. John's reported what happened accurately. I just am learning about this problem. And the way I am starting to think about it is that there's two different problems. One is the new Mainers, and those are the people who are at the Best Western and the Casco Bay Inn, essentially. And the rest are what we would call just traditional people who are in poverty or in distress of some kind. And they all have been getting ERA money, so that's not the issue. They'll all be affected if you don't get ERA money, but the new Mainers have no ability to earn money or to take care of themselves because of the immigration restrictions. The older Mainers do have that possibility, but may be restricted by virtue of conditions that they experience personally. And so to that extent, we talked about maybe the way to think about this from a Freeport perspective, if this great plan does not occur, is to have Sarah's and Preble Street, who sat at one of these meetings with us, offered to, as I understand it, to provide a social service assistance to help the group of older Mainers who may have access to a whole range of social services that they don't access because of their personal problems, and work with them on a case-by-case basis and have Freeport involved. And I understand, John, and Preble Street, we're going to talk about that more. But what I don't understand about this list is when you get to the last 2 categories, it seems to me to be double counting from what I understood. If it's not, tell me how. Because I get the 30, the Best Western households, those are the ones that might be relocated to Portland or South Portland. The Casco Bay ones are ones that Portland's taking care of and aren't our responsibility yet, if maybe never. And then we have the old Mainers, and I understood them to be roughly 20 families that are filtered throughout our community. Is it really 50 families?
Yeah, there's 81 households that are not Portland's responsibility that are on ERA in Freeport right now. So 30 at the Best Western, 20 at other Freeport hotels. Yeah, call them old Mainers, but we're not saying old.
I understand.
Old Mainers is an age.
Not resident aliens.
Long-term residents, right? Exactly. So there's 20 at the other Freeport hotels split between them, and at average that number fluctuates a little bit. It's been pretty steady. The other 31 households number is people who are in apartments or rental houses that are on ERA that do not have income that will support them. So they are also potential eviction cases. It may be a very different trajectory. So they may have some income or they may have no income. I think you summed it up pretty well when you said that the first 2 categories 100% would qualify for most forms of assistance because their permissible monthly income would be 0 because they're not allowed to work. The other 2, the second 2 groups, some of them certainly would qualify because for traditional existing non-ERA assistance because they have their income may be 0 for legitimate reasons. The part where it gets difficult is GA has always been kind of the bridge funding mechanism. So if somebody is not able to work, there are plenty of reasons why somebody may not be able to work. There are a lot of federal programs, SSDI, things like that, that take a while to get into, but there are, if you are long-term unable to work for a legitimate medical reason or some other reason, let's say, for example, a disability that you are not able to, you'll 100% will never be able to work, there are long-term federal programs that those people deserve to be on and that they need to get into. GA is not supposed to support somebody for 37 years. They're supposed to support them for the 6 months,
But
8 months, 10 months till
they
get
need
onto
help to
system.
get into those programs, and that's where that social service support would be
Exactly,
helpful.
yes. But no, those 51 other family members are, as you're saying, old Mainers. I like that term. It has a cachet for sure. That's the group.
Okay, well, again, the way that I left these meetings was understanding that there was a full court press to solve this problem through spring, through the cold winter months, and during that period of time, some other solutions would be discussed. Recognizing that that might not work, there was some question about what steps the town should be thinking about if it doesn't, and I don't, tonight's not the night for that to be talking about, I don't think. But this is a daunting amount of money if you think you're going to replace it from town tax base. So it's
So, of the 81 families potentially on our GA rolls, how does that compare to last year and previous years? How many families do we typically support in years past?
A few.
A
monthly.
few, like 10 or less?
A few per month, maybe.
Okay.
1 to 10 in a busy month might be 0 to 3 in a
Got
slow
it.
month.
And now we've got
So, and that would
80.
be, for example, like a family of 4 where somebody,
Mhm.
you know, there's a single earner who
Mhm.
loses the
Mhm.
job and they're going to be evicted and they're paid for a month or 2 of rent while they either search for a new job or they get onto a program or something like that. It might be somebody, we do have these from time to time, like somebody who is applying for long-term disability that's going to take a year, and the town pays for their GA expenses, you know, through that process. We have had smaller groups of new Mainers before. There was a wave, the first group in the recent immigration wave that came in to the expo, where they stayed at the expo about 2 years ago. About 3 or 4 of those families relocated. It was more like, I think like 7 or 8 between Yarmouth and Freeport. We were splitting Yarmouth GA at the time out of the Freeport office. So I think 4 or 5 were in Yarmouth, thank you, and 2 or 3 ended up locating in Freeport and actually are permanent Freeport residents now and have gotten their work papers, and the process worked exactly as it was supposed to. It was the gap. So this has all happened on a much smaller scale before. The real big difference right now, like if this was last year or 2 years ago, I wouldn't be here talking to you because it would be within our GA average, you know, our normal range of normal. The problem is that the hotels being empty during the COVID pandemic, a large group of people, this is not just new Mainers, a large group of people during the COVID pandemic becoming homeless. The shelters in Portland, several of them, major one closing, and the people that would have been clients of those services then being moved out to hotels, not just in we only seeing a small amount of that traffic in Freeport, but larger groups in South Portland, Scarborough, Westbrook, Old Orchard Beach in the off-season was another location, much like Freeport. So that 51 number would have been maybe like 5 if it was the traditional Freeport GA caseload.
And of the 28 new Mainer families at the Casco Bay, and they're not under this ERA deadline, are there other looming deadlines for them? Any other reasons pending why the City of Portland might not have access to the funds they're using to pay for these folks today?
Not that I'm aware of at this time, but I don't want to promise anything with somebody else's operating funds. I can't. But no, we're not aware of any drop-off cliffs or anything like that for that group. However, my understanding is that the plan for that group is a drawdown as those families are placed in long-term housing or We're starting to come into the time where they might actually get their immigration cases resolved and get work authorizations and things like that, which is great because that's the solution to the whole, or at least 2/3 of the dilemma here. As they move out, they're not being backfilled by Portland. At least that is our understanding of how that's working. And the Casco Bay Inn is not necessarily putting new people that are in any of our other categories into those rooms.
Right. And I
But
understand
again,
that.
that's a private business decision that I
Right.
can't commit to.
Sure,
We just
sure.
can report what we're told.
Yeah. And I've heard anecdotally too that some of the new Mainers, as these positive developments happen there, whether they get work authorization or get placed or find housing, some of them are opting to move to other communities where they have
Correct.
different opportunities or services available to them that they don't have here. So it's not that they can't stay here, it's that they would prefer to be somewhere else, in some cases, not all of them, of course.
To that point, I mean, the guy from the Best Western was a good guy.
Yeah.
I mean, it surprised me. I mean, you know, to realize what a good guy he was. But his reason for moving the people to South Portland, because it's better for them.
Yeah.
You know, they're closer to services, closer to transportation, closer to all of the things that they could use. The only issue that remained after that, as I understood it, was the kids who were in high school. And we have a number of kids in our high schools that are with these families who the schools like, and they like the schools.
Not just the high school.
Oh,
Yeah,
that's
all
fair,
schools,
that's
yeah.
fair.
All the way through.
And there was some discussion about providing transportation for those who wanted to stay in high school, even though their families might move to South Portland to take advantage of the Best Western offer, which seemed healthy.
Yeah, Daryl?
We've been discussing, we reached out to the state, we reached out to the federal level. Have we reached out to Catholic Charities? Have we reached out to other organizations similar to that that they're not the traditional people that help, but they certainly have had an influence on, bringing people to our area, and maybe they could help us. Have we asked?
Sarah's on, maybe that might be a question that she can answer, because yes, to answer the question shortly, and she can provide a lot more detail, they're all very heavily involved in placing people here, but I don't have good information on that. Sarah, is that something you could speak on briefly?
Yeah. I mean, we're definitely at the table with folks from many of these organizations that you're thinking of. Catholic Charities hasn't really been there. Their focus, my understanding, is more on refugees who settle in the area versus asylum seekers, which there is a pretty big difference. I think that's where their funding is primarily focused. But we have been working with Maine Immigrant Rights Coalition very closely. They helped place the families here. And are working collaboratively towards a solution. So there are other agencies that kind of have a focus on working with refugees, immigrants, asylum seekers that are involved in this process.
And Sarah, a lot of the aid agencies, let's talk about the non-New Mainer portion of that. A lot of those were placements. I know a lot of people at the beginning phase of that pointed a finger at the city of Portland at their GA office, but most of those placements did not come from Portland GA, is that correct? Most of those were from other agencies that have put people into ERA housing in either apartments or hotels in Freeport, correct?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's my understanding of it. I wasn't a part of that decision-making process, but I do think like Opportunity Alliance had placed a number of folks there, and I think there were a couple of other agencies as well. I have found, and what Mike and I have seen, is that some of the folks who have ERA have gone from hotel to hotel. So there's really no agency placing them there at that point. A lot of folks do kind of self-identify where they want to go, and the ERA program was quite portable, and that did give that kind of individual opportunity to make choices and kind of go where folks thought there would be more resources or jobs or other potentials that would sway them.
That's similar to what we see with GA voucher placements, correct? So where somebody's given, hey, here's housing assistance, you can use it in any hotel that's an approved receiver of those funds. So that we see that on the GA end as well, where people land here from agencies across the state, not just here, but land in hotels throughout the state from other corners of the state that there's no real connection. It's not Freeport people that need housing end up ERA at Freeport hotels. It's very scattered. There is no central directional guiding principle for where people end up. There are so many different agencies and placements that are happening that makes it almost impossible to truly understand the scope of what's going on.
So, since we've got our state rep here in the room, I'll invite you to come up. And I have two questions for you to start with. One is there anything significant that we've missed that you think we ought to know about? And then secondly, for the bill that's, will likely be pending before your next session, I imagine that having us draft a letter to you and Senator Daughtry is more like preaching to the choir, and we don't really need to do that. Is there anything that we can do to kind of help the cause?
On your first question of, are we missing anything? In the meeting, just so folks know, I'm part of again, Melanie Sachs, Freeport resident, state representative, hello. I attend the Housing Caucus every week, which is a group of legislators who last year passed quite a few bills to try and put a dent, and I say a small dent, in the housing crisis that we all know is coming long term. For example, one of the pieces that I reported to you all at a meeting was significant in that you could now use TIF funds for supportive services, just as a reminder. So should you choose to do things like part-time housing navigator, then you can use TIF funds to do so because of a bill that was passed last year in the legislature.
Existing TIFs or new TIFs that we write that into?
And John and Councilor Egan and I had asked out of Maine Municipal Association, whereas I think you have to go back and revise your TIF, correct, if I remember the answer to that?
But it's
permissible now.
It's a permissible and eligible expense, which is a huge expansion to TIF districts. So, for example, many of the folks, and this is what Sarah and Mike over at the Exemplary Freeport Community Services have been saying, a real gap we have here in Freeport is not having a housing navigator. We have done a great job through Freeport Community Services, through community members in supporting folks who are here, but that next step is often by, for example, two of our amazing realtors who have been locating apartments to be able to bring people there, but there is a lot of paperwork to do. People can't take that next step unless they are able, for example, for a new Mainer population, put in their asylum application because the clock starts on their work permits at 180 days after that application has been filed. So they can't even look for work, can't even start that clock until that application goes. They don't always know how to find an affordable housing unit anywhere. So those are some gaps we have as a community. I know you just asked what we're missing. That's what we're missing. Freeport Community Services can only do so much. I'm hopeful that that's part of the conversation within the housing committee that you all just established as a need, as an unmet need within this community. As for the legislation, I was delighted to bring Greg Payne to several meetings. One was Zoom, and one he actually came here to Freeport, which was amazing. Greg Payne has been a long time person advocating within the Affordable Housing Coalition, as well as now is the Governor Mills' senior housing policy advisor, and he came to Freeport. He's excited about the work we are all doing collaboratively, and he is the one, as a member of the Mills administration, who let us all know at that meeting last week that there will be some sort of legislation offered, but no details whatsoever. As far as a letter, I certainly welcome a letter from the council. I certainly welcome any feedback from community members. I certainly hope that the legislature will think about the fact that here in Freeport alone, we have 81 families who potentially could be turned out in the cold December 31st. And that is not a prospect that I think any one of us, I don't care where you live in this state, would like to see. So it's clear to me that there's a need, because what I hear most from residents here in Freeport is these are people we care about, whether we know them or not. And many of us do know them. And you may not know that the person, your neighbor, has GA assistance or emergency rental assistance, but I do know that you don't want them out on the street. So I'm committed to doing everything I can within the legislature to pass a package to, again, at least get us through the end of April.
Is there any visibility beyond that? I mean, it's great if we can get that passed and get through the winter months, but the problem isn't going away.
Right.
Just postponing the resolution of it.
Correct. And the report that I gave you last year after the first session does detail the steps that we had taken to further housing. Along with that, there was an additional bond package. I've already seen a slate of bills for this proposals that could be offered. One of my favorites is pushing GA reimbursement up to 90%. As you know, my focus on municipal reimbursement is quite laser-like. But I do think that it is a statewide problem, that municipalities by default are the ones trying to help our communities stave off homelessness. That's what Freeport Community Services has done for almost 50 years, if you think about it. It's trying to help people stay in their homes, stay in their communities. And that, I'm a little biased on that. But that's also the purpose, just as Peter said, for general assistance, help you get through. Just help you get through. And that's what we're here to do. And so I think GA, for example, is important in that. There are a whole raft of bills being proposed. I've seen at least 8 so far around the housing, and how many of them will actually get offered and how many of them will move through. But there are long and short-term solutions. And I could do a whole thing about who's in the homeless populations and whether it's domestic violence victims, whether it's families, whether it's new Mainers, whether it's chronically and persistently mentally ill. There's categories of people who often comprise or single adults who are just jobless circumstance. But they all have very specific needs, and there are proposals to address all of that.
So part of that 4 months is giving the legislature time to develop some of the details.
But I will say that HUD funding being gutted back in the Reagan years was one of the reasons. I mean, the supply of housing went down way back in the day. Again, I don't need to go into that for you all, but this is a really long-term problem that, as Councilor Egan had said, supply is one of the ways that we can help affect that, is putting in more units statewide.
Anybody else have questions for anybody? Yeah, Jake?
Are we looking into, like, let's say that this doesn't work out and we don't get funding past December. Have we contacted, like, the school? Can we transform a gymnasium or something as a temporary? Has that conversation been had? Because I'm just thinking they have showers, there's a cafeteria for food. Like, if we really get down to it, is there any emergency contingency
I don't
plan?
think anybody's had that conversation with the school district yet.
We will have that maybe conversation in a couple of weeks.
Let's not happen until we know what we're gonna get.
Yeah.
It's not worth our time. You know, again, at this meeting, there was some discussion about that's Plan A, that's a wonderful plan, let's hope it works. What happens if it doesn't? That was specifically discussed, and I think the collective judgment of the group that was assembled, which was quite involved, was let's figure out whether Plan A's got a shot at working. We'll know that pretty quickly, because the vote will be in the first couple weeks of December. And then you have lost maybe a week or two, but then you may find yourself asking those kinds of questions in this town to keep people healthy, safe, sound, warm, fed, you know, and that's the horrible. That's what got us so nervous in the first place. So that's a great question. I don't think, though, that we're ready from what I heard at this meeting to get this whole group focused on that, or even this town focused on that, until you know whether the legislature is going to come up with this 4-month reprise. Does that make sense? I mean, I'm with you. The earlier we start thinking about what we might do if this doesn't work, makes sense to me. But I also was impressed by the wisdom at the table, which was, don't waste your time on things that you may never have to do in this time period. Let's wait and see what happens to Plan A.
That's coming from someone who is stronger. That his opinion was stronger than your opinion, what you just said at the meeting, so.
I'm right with you in terms of what
I mean,
Isn't that where we,
in terms of Plan B, there's
this is
none.
why we're here, because we don't do that.
You know
I
what?
mean, you've been saying for 8 months, it's going away. Well, don't worry about it till it goes away, and now we're here, and now it's,
That's fair.
Yeah, I guess, I think that it's a phone call conversation of, hey, is this a possibility? And at some point, we've got to have a conversation, and I guess I'm a little concerned about just saying somebody else is going to deal with it. I would rather have preliminary, very early discussions. I just don't think it's that hard to just prep the school, because who knows what the school board would have to do to get this to go through, right? Like, whose purview is it for the school board to do that? Because I don't think we have a building to do this. I don't want all those people to be out on the streets and.
We had that discussion at this meeting, which I think there was a little push from the executive part of the state. I won't, doesn't implicate Melanie at all, because it's not her position that, oh, there's gonna be local shelters that are gonna pop up, and I think Sarah and Mike, and to some extent the town, we threw our hands up and like, where? Like, there's, 2 years to build something, never mind even if we had emergency funding available to do it. What are we gonna convert? There's not a building or a space in Freeport that's big enough to convert that. I think Sarah did a great job of pushing, like, so what's Plan B at the state level? Like, which armory is gonna get turned into which civic center? Is it the Coliseum? Is it the Cumberland County Civic Center? Whose ice hockey season is getting put on hold because we need 2,000, 3,000, 8,000 beds here? And I think there's not a plan there at the state level for that from the executive level, and they are being very helpful, and they're looking at a lot of different things, but I do get the impression that the legislature is gonna have to deal with this one, and there's some truth to that, but that, I know you weren't, like, great. Wasn't a great thing.
I might suggest that a more potentially viable Plan B is financial. Is that while the ERA might be ending, there may be either other, I hate to say this, other possible hotel or hospitality facilities and or potentially private units in the community that, if they were paid, would put up one of the families. And I think that may be more viable.
I do want to note, Sarah may want to jump in here. I mean, one of her concerns, as well as mine, is the fact that many of the hotels would like to shut down, at least here in Freeport, and that even in a normal course of operations, having a place for somebody in an emergency situation is going to be increasingly unlikely. Sarah, I don't know if you'd like to speak to that.
I heard that some of the hotels aren't going to take their referrals, but there may be another conversation that Freeport locally has with potentially other property owners, as a way to find a place, as opposed to a gymnasium somewhere.
And Daryl.
Yeah, I mean, Plan B could have even more smaller inputs from residents. I've got a basement apartment you could use, that sort of thing. Could be churches. It could be a whole lot of things that we aren't talking about now. But that effort to develop that Plan B would have to be coordinated and discussed with the families, and there'd have to be contact with. I mean, it isn't as simple as making a phone call to the RSU. Although there's nothing wrong with making a phone call to the RSU and saying, we're thinking about this. Would you start talking about what the possibilities are? But to start developing Plan B is really another major undertaking for a town like ours. It would require FCS, which has made it very clear that they're stressed and have no resources to address this beyond what they're already doing. The council may need to get involved, blah, 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 blah. And that's why I thought it made some sense before we started down that road, organizing all of that, to wait and give Plan A a real shot at seeing whether it's realistic or not. Because if it is, then we have 4 months to do this, as opposed to 2 days or 2 weeks.
But if we don't, we have 2 weeks instead of a month. So I think maybe find some of the bigger buildings around here that don't have anybody in them right now or whatever. So just say, hey, could you do this? Could you do that?
We're all free to call those buildings.
We don't have a lot of them. I think the high school is the biggest one.
All the churches.
Yeah, maybe the churches, but those are, just to say, hey, could we do something like this for a temporary thing? We're looking 4 months. That's not really temporary, but whatever they could do just to get it down. But sticking our head in the sand and saying, oh, the state's gonna do it. And I agree. I think that's where it belongs. And I hope it comes true, but to be a little bit prepared. I'm not saying go down the whole, okay, we need to have these roles and all that stuff. Just ask the question.
We've got a meeting with the RSU next Thursday.
It'll be on the agenda, I think.
You and
at this
I,
point,
so
yeah.
we're happy to bring it up and say you should put this on your radar as a possibility, and by then we'll probably have either an indication or close to an indication, if not Thursday, maybe the following Monday or so. I would imagine you'll probably start to get some sense of how feasible that
Trust me, I've
extension
been
is.
asking.
Yeah, I'm sure. I'm sure you have been asking. Yeah. Yeah. Sorry, Darrell. You've been waiting.
Just a word.
Yeah.
Living through the ice storm as the emergency preparedness director in the city of Waterville, operating a shelter for city for 2.5 weeks. We don't even want to be discussing this. We don't have the infrastructure, and we don't have the support staff to move people into the gym or whatever. Maybe the churches or in smaller groups or something like that. Maybe some of the vacant stores or something along that line. But logistically, to feed the number of people that we're going in, we are not able to sustain that. God forbid we have a regular emergency, we're not going to be able to sustain that. If if we have a blizzard and have to open one, I'll be honest with you here. But so I think we need to look at those other alternatives and maybe reach out. And I guess the only one question I still have in my mind, so, and maybe Sarah can answer this. So my understanding, so like Catholic Charities will bring people here and they leave them, and then it's your responsibility?
I don't want to pick on Catholic Charities.
Well, I do.
Charities. So, I mean, yes, that's essentially what's happened with other agencies. So we've had a couple of different agencies that did place families at the Best Western in particular, and there's been some support for food, but there's not been any on-site case management. There's not been any on-site support. We were able to secure a full-time 1-year position through Good Shepherd, a grant that I wrote back in the early spring. So we have a staff person through that grant funding who's providing some on-site support. She's not really a caseworker, but she's just making sure that people are safe and they have what they need. And it's kind of helping them navigate resources and connect to other opportunities within the community to get their needs met. So in a way, you're not wrong, but it's not Catholic Charities, so we won't pick on them.
Well,
and
my point is there are other organizations influencing us here significantly. They come to our community, and we welcome them to our community, and then it's our burden. So maybe a different discussion or a different approach of how we go to say, you're certainly welcome here, but how
do you get that? What's going on? What's the long-term plan before?
So one of the, sorry, Sarah, go ahead. You were speaking first on delay.
I think that the kind of bigger picture to that is, we were never asked. We were never approached about whether or not this was an option. It was something that was worked out with the hotel because it had happened previously, because other this gentleman and I think a few others within the community own multiple hotels that are doing similar shelter by hotel stays. And so where Freeport had vacancies given the time of year, it was an opportunity that presented itself. So, I definitely don't fault the agencies that were trying to house the hundreds of homeless people that after May 5th were being refused shelter by the city of Portland. I can't fault them for that. It's one of those things where people were literally sleeping on the streets. They needed a safe option, and Freeport was the opportunity for that. So it's unfortunate that there wasn't as much follow-up support as we all would have hoped. I would love to have had somebody on site every day helping folks towards housing at the Best Western, but that didn't happen. And, to Melanie's point earlier, we've had a number of local residents who have so generously stepped up and made truly miracles happen. So we're making it work. it's an unfortunate how it happened, yes, of course, but it was a response to a true humanitarian crisis that was happening as a result of just some necessary changes that needed to happen. And in my opinion, again, a lack of state response.
Peter?
Thank you, and this just shows that maybe better coordination and communication maybe helps address this, but that's, yeah.
Always.
Well, the key, you're close to what the real, I mean, that's the way you describe it, like they just dump people here and it's our responsibility. It's not quite that blunt, but that's how I know Sarah and I felt in January. I mean, it was kind of like, well, I guess the town does not have any say in that process, and it was extremely frustrating to be learning, like, these are the things that are happening, like, okay. Part of the driver here, though, that's the problem, is the structure for how GA, homelessness, things like that are handled. The way that we're set up in the state is that there are 499 local government agencies, if you count the counties and with all the municipalities. And GA is the responsibility of not just where the person is from. Like, it's not like someone in Freeport experiences homelessness or loses a job or has some condition that they qualify for GA. The way that the system is set up, it's where they live, where they move to, or where they claim GA. So when somebody is in Freeport for a set period of time in a hotel, shelter by hotel, they become a Freeport resident. If you move into a hotel and you say, I live in Freeport now, and you don't have another place to stay, you're a Freeport resident. And the fact that this system has been set up that way for, 50 years, well, since that program was started, I don't have the experience to know when that was. And there's been no concerted statewide effort to consolidate that into a single clearinghouse or a single agency that deals with that. And I don't think there's any interest to do that. I think that the system of, well, let the 500 local government units fight over whose responsibility this is. And I do not say that this is from the legislature, but I've gotten from several different different executive administrations since I've worked here, at least, that's great. And that's, the local governments will handle it, and that's the problem. It really is a coordinated statewide issue because the responsibility goes to so many different places and the burden falls on so many different municipalities. We have people from, I'll use my classic example, right, Chris? Like, we've got someone from Millinocket who ended up in Portland, who Portland GA placed in Freeport. That is not the responsibility of where they came from. It's not the responsibility of where they lived before then. They didn't want to go to Freeport. There was a hotel that was available and they needed an emergency shelter, and that's going to be Freeport's problem. It has no tie to our local community. The towns and the cities that are generating, where these cases are coming from, they're generating the caseload for general assistance for homeless shelters, bear no responsibility for that, right? Like, if Freeport, we have a little bit more, we're experiencing now what Portland has seen for 20 years, right? Is we have a higher per capita draw because we have these hotels available. We should probably be dealing with 20 or 30 of these families, not 80 of these families on a per capita basis, like just people from Freeport it's our responsibility to deal with. That's not how it works. And that's the really frustrating part of it, is that you've got towns that provide no services. This is the service center argument, and I'll shut up after this, is, you've got neighboring towns to us that provide no services, and we're a small catch area. I mean, imagine being a Westbrook, a Scarborough, or a Portland or a South Portland. They're catching, South Portland's catching everyone from Cape Elizabeth to Buxton to the Lakes region down. They're probably on the same per capita thing that we're seeing, the same per capita loading, but they're so much bigger, right? And there's no way that the places that are generating the caseloads compensate the towns that are dealing with it. And that's a statewide issue. And I'm not saying whether it should be 100% paid for, 0% paid for, or somewhere in between, but it's a statewide problem, and it's a problem for us to be financing it on an individual local basis when only 40 or 50 of the municipalities out of the 500 local government units in the state are really picking any of that up. That's the problem. And I look at you because you're going to fix everything, right, Madam State Rep? So I think a lot of people have known it's an issue, but it's a tough problem to fix. You'd have to create an arm of the state government, which is never going to be easy or fly probably in our lifetime, so.
I think what this conversation encapsulates is this is tough, right? This is a tough issue, and there's not just one piece. Housing, getting somebody housed who is unhoused is incredibly important. If that person needs support services to maintain that housing, that's incredibly important. If they need something affordable, the missing middle, that's incredibly important. There are so many pieces of this that there is no magic bullet. And so saying to community members or to counselors, the best thing I can say is here in Freeport, we are all talking together, and we are bringing in the governor's housing policy advisor, the top guy, to say, here's our concerns, and he's very responsive to that. He's like I said, he's come willingly and is very appreciative of the commitment that Freeport Community Services, Freeport Housing Trust, the Town Council, the state legislature, all of us are really working together to solve an intractable problem. And I think I'll just leave you with that bit of wisdom of the fact that we are continuing to talk and coordinate is not like every community. The amazing support of our community members for every single person who lands here in Freeport. That's been one of the things I've loved about Freeport and when I worked in the social services agency. It doesn't matter if you've been here a day or 100 years, we were here to help you. And that's who we are. And that's who we will continue to be. I know that. But this one is tough because it is a nationwide problem. This is not just a Freeport problem or just a state of Maine problem. This is happening nationwide. We're doing our best to fix it, but it's really, really difficult. Really, really hard.
It's a somber note to leave on.
We're one of, to feel good, we're one of what, a handful, 10 communities that really understand the full scope of the problem, and most of them are in our county area. And
I would say so.
we're looking at this, most municipalities don't have a clue that either this is even an issue.
Right, and that will be, if there's an emergency measure before the legislature, we need 3/4. We need, or excuse me, a 2/3 majority to pass it for an emergency measure. So it may come.
That's what we would need for that April bill.
That's what I need for that bill
The
coming
bill through April, yeah.
And so we need, again, the thought of kicking out families of any kind in December, in May, is not palatable. So,
Well, my hunch is that you'll talk to some combination of us before next Tuesday
Yeah.
and offer any updates that you have, and we can
course.
report out, because we'll be meeting again in 1 week instead of 2. So we can report.
we don't
out.
even get
Constant
sworn in
reporting
until,
at this point,
we
right?
don't get sworn in until the 7th, so.
Yeah, which is the day after our meeting. yeah.
Right, so
Yep.
it'll be, I'll have an update as soon as I can. But always, please feel free, and thanks to the people who have emailed me saying housing is priority for all Mainers. And for those of you who have expressed concerns, I haven't heard them yet, please feel free to call me if you do. I heard a few of them here tonight, that's good. But I think that this kind of close coordination, making sure Freeport Community Services continues to have the support that they need, that this new housing committee, so we can look for longer term solutions for our community. All of these pieces are incredibly important.
Thanks for the work you've been doing.
I
To you and
appreciate the
Sarah,
time.
to you and your staff as well. Any final thoughts before we move on? We got one more item on our agenda. Thank you, Melanie.
I don't know if anybody wants to hear the final thoughts on this subject, that the frustration level, so.
I think it comes down to we don't have enough units. I mean, that's.
Yeah.
We're shuffling a deck that
State and
it's
the
like-
country, yeah, yep, yep.
Well, we're kicking the can down the road again.
Yeah.
So, and I think, Peter, you have a valid point of how it's gonna be addressed at the state level. Well, maybe, let's start a little conversation and see where it goes. But you got MMA, and I would hope MMA, the LPC would take this as an issue, and we've got a very good representative here. Now's the time to start having some input.
It's on the table at their next meeting, I understand it, so yep.
They're fully engaged.
All right, so our last item is an executive session. This one is to consider action relative to an executive session pursuant to Title I, MRSA Section 405-6A, pertaining to an employment matter. Before we take a vote, Counselor Danielle, you have a question?
Can we add to that, we've done executive sessions about land use before, or real estate matters? Could we add that to then talk about a potential housing thing?
Yeah, I think
Yeah,
we just
there's-
need to refer to the right
There's
thing,
no
right?
notice requirements, but let me get you a,
Okay.
let me get you a citation. Do you wanna, well, I don't need this.
Oh, yeah,
Zoom
we can do it here,
anymore.
so you don't have to shut the Zoom.
I just feel like the real estate matter might be interesting. I don't know if I've gotten an update on it in a while.
Yep.
Personally.
Which,
one
okay,
we've talked
no,
about.
yeah, don't say it out loud. I don't,
Oh, no, internet, hang on. Gotta get connected to the internet.
I'm gonna do it in, do you have the agenda, is it right there?
Yeah, that's the agenda there.
Okay, MRSA,
So I can find it this way.
say,
There we go.
4056. It's not gonna be A, it's gonna be.
But that same section, right?
Yeah, it's gonna be everything except for the A. So your motion should read not just A relating to a personnel matter, but also,
Here we go.
it's not, it's,
4, 5, 6. A is employment, B.
it's not
is-
real estate because it's any, oh yeah,
Yep,
right here,
just-
C.
Yep.
So C, discussion or consideration of the condition, acquisition or use of real or personal property permanently attached to real property or interest therein, or disposition of publicly held property or economic development only if premature disclosures of the information would prejudice the competitive or bargaining position of the body or agency. That has to do with any real estate deal that you are negotiating and you don't want to give away terms to the other side, which I think is what you're referring to, correct, Counselor? So 405C.
So moved.
4, 5, 6, C.
405-6C.
C. 4, 5, 6, A and 6, C. Okay.
And we need roll call on that from, well,
We'll be back in a sec.
we'll get his roll when he
Okay.
comes back. Chris, are you leaving? Yes. We're gonna take a roll, but
We can let you know if it's not unanimous, but I assume it will be unanimous, yeah. And then we don't expect any action, other than coming out of the executive session, we don't expect to take any action in the executive session, so if anybody's waiting
yeah, so
around
you'll
for
just,
final.
so you'll just have a motion to come out in the time, which I'll give you tomorrow. Brian, and we're gonna not come back with any real business afterwards, so let's kill the. Yes. Okay, after they take the vote, we'll kill the
Yes.
broadcast. Okay?
Yes, right? All those in favor?
All right, so roll call to go into executive session for sections 4, 5, 6, A and C to discuss employment matters and real estate matters. Counselor Fournier?
Yes.
Counselor Lawrence?
Yes.
Counselor Daniele?
Yes.
Counselor Bradley?
Yes.
Counselor Egan?
Yes.
And Counselor Pilcher votes yes. So we are in executive session.